That's a comment you'd want to look back on.
Yeah.
Hey, Roel, nice to meet you, mate. How you going?
Hi, Mark.
Good evening,
Tracy.
everybody. Good afternoon. Good morning. It's difficult to say what's the best term, is it? You know, it's we're all here anyway. That's the main thing.
Good day.
So,
What
yes,
about good day?
Yeah, we'll just go with good day. Good day. Actually, funny, it was Ripper was just talking about the Aussie Wolves football. How much did Eric Jose love the Aussie Wolves football? Particularly the ladies' Aussie Rules football. That was something else. That was. Can those girls hit? I'll tell you what, it was set. It's pretty good. Anyway, yes, as I say, hi there, Tracy, Mark, Roel. So
good morning, Northern World.
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got quite a bit to get through. I'm gonna start off by going clockwise. Roel, please just provide us with a quick public information service announcement. How does one inject oneself with disinfectant in order to cure COVID?
Oh God.
Well, by not actually. Yeah, it's a very bad advice. Of course, well, actually, he didn't give literally that advice, but even talking about the notion of injecting disinfectant is well, stupid thing to do. Of course, there will always be people who think, "Oh, I gotta get that Clorox and pour it down my throat or whatever." So it's very stupid thing to do, and it's of course logical that the producers of those disinfectant stuff put a warning on their website and say, "Don't try this at home."
Yeah.
But, well, you only need to look at Briggs, the woman on the side, to see that she was devastated that he was saying things like this.
I mean, you know, put aside the idea that he's, you know, people question his leadership. What I would say is he comes across as somebody who's trying to present himself as the oracle, the guy that knows everything. You know, it's like he's got the, you know, he would be the archetypal fellow that's got the done it, seen it, got the T-shirt type of person. You know, he just likes to be seen as this, you know, fantastic brain. You know, that everybody should look up to him because, you know.
Yeah.
I think you're being very complimentary to him personally. I think the man's absolutely certifiable.
Yeah, I mean, there's a well-known joke. I suppose you might have heard it, but it goes along these lines. So it's three presidents. They all unfortunately die at the same time, and they go before God. And Ronald Reagan goes in first, you know, and God says to Ronald Reagan, "What do you believe in?" You know, and he says he believes in democracy and the American standards and everything. You know, God says, "You deserve a seat at my right hand." In comes Barack Obama. "What do you believe in?" I believe in, you know, the rights for all, equality in this world. You know, that we're all equal. God says, "That's very good. Come on in." Donald Trump comes in. God says to Trump, what do you believe in?" Trump says, "I believe you're in my seat."
I need to drum roll with it, Paul.
Oh, no. Anyway, sorry, we'll get on to Mark in a moment. I've got a question for Tracy first up. Can you remember when we did our last live chat together?
I do indeed, yeah.
You mentioned getting in touch with or finding out as much as I could about Saul Kassan.
Yes, and I've been privy to all that you've been doing. I see that you've been conversing with him through email and so on. So,
well, do you know, not just Saul Kassan, but also I've been in touch with. Do you know who wrote the with Steve Drizzen back in 2004?
Richard Leo.
Yes, I've been in touch with Richard Leo as well, and I'm hoping at some point in the future that he will agree to come on with me. I did message him, and he said, "Look, Paul, you know, we're really snowed under because he teaches at a university in California. Let me know. Get in touch with me again later on in the summer when the academic year is over. So you never know. Maybe I can get in with get a chat with him, or maybe the dude can do a chat with him. Seeing it's the same time zones. Okay. So
I was fortunate to speak with Dr. Leo for about 2 hours on a Friday afternoon, and he turned out to be one of my favorite people to interview. He was extremely nice, nice, very generous.
Well, if you can put in a good word for me and tell him, please, I am not Welsh. Honestly, I am not Welsh. Do not listen to what Steve Drizzen tells him.
Yeah, but you're Scottish. So it's like...
Just
I
like
take
Captain
that
Crunch.
back. One of my good friends is Scottish, so I'll take that back.
There's a follow-up to that, Mark. I've seen an Australian sign. Trespassers will be shot. Survivors will be shot again. Or words to that effect. Okay, moving on to Mark.
Good morning, good evening.
Morning.
Hi,
Hi,
Melbourne.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we've got Roel in is it the north of Holland, Groningen?
Yes, Groningen. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Actually, I'm in a small village called Harkstede, which is between Groningen and Hoogzand, high sands in English, but it's near Groningen. Yeah.
Excellent. And we've got Mark north of Sydney.
Yeah,
Tracy,
I'm about an hour north.
Yeah. And I'm on Crunch Island here. In fact, I fancy visiting somebody. I fancy visiting a friend of mine. So I'm going to do that very shortly. Yes, as you can imagine, as one must. So, Mark.
Yes, my friend.
I wanted to ask you about how you got into following this case to begin with, because where you go every so often each year is quite staggering, because you actually go and visit a certain Mr. Avery.
I do indeed. So I guess I'll just very quickly, my story is probably not a lot different to many people, although I wasn't an early adopter of my interest in the program. That was just through ignorance, not through any other reason. And roughly about 3 years ago from now, I was over in the UK, and my daughter, who was there at the time teaching, who knows I'm very interested in social justice issues, said to me, "Dad, hey, I want you to watch Making a Murderer." And I kind of, in the back of my mind, knew a little tiny bit about it. I must have heard something somewhere. And I sat down and watched it with her, watched about 3 episodes. The next day I was due to fly back to Australia, so I joined Netflix and downloaded the other 7 episodes and watched them on the plane on the way home. And 13 times later, I've watched the full show, as well as season 2 about 6 or 7 times. But from there, I got involved in the in 2017 in the social media groups, including with yourself and Eric Jose and others, and started doing a few videos myself. And then in June of 2018, I went to the rally in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and I met many wonderful, wonderful people there. In particular, I caught up with Sandy Greenman, who we're all very familiar with, and struck up a nice friendship with Sandy. And then post the rally, I went back to Wisconsin 2 months later, because I just had this burning desire to go back and understand more of the environment that was going on there. And throughout since then, which I guess is June 2018 to now, I've been back there 8 times, I think, now. And partway through, at the beginning of 2019, Sandy and I were having a discussion, and at the time, Stephen, who I had spoken to on the telephone, but obviously had never met. Everyone has a limited number of visitors on their visitors list, and Stephen didn't have any male visitors on his visitors list that weren't family. So it was thought that it would be a good idea, subject to Stephen being okay with it, that I go on his visitors list. He knew me already. It wasn't like I was a total stranger. And
Sure.
I was fortunate enough to be put on his visitors list. And then from March of last year, I've been, as I said, I visited him in Warpon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. I've been back for visits, and in total about 36 visits I've been to Warpon to see him. So
wow,
spent, given that each visit's about 3.5 hours, yeah, that's a lot of hours. So I know Stephen very well, and we've become good friends and good sort of companions in the sense of supporting the cause and supporting him. And that's really how I came to be involved. And of course, that has filtered out into the rest of the Avery family, including all the Dassey boys and Barbara and Scott and Mr. and Mrs. Avery and the Chasers and all those. So they're a wonderful group of people, just everyday folk struggling to cope with something that could happen to us all. So
yeah.
I've never. The final thing I'll say without being too rave on too much is that I've never in my life previously been involved in anything like this at all. So I'm really surprised myself how passionate I am about this. But I think that's for all of us. It's just that we can see ourselves inside this family. We can see ourselves how egregious this has been, and we can't let it go until justice is finally served. So, and I saw Stephen as recently as last month at the beginning. Excellent. In March. That's when last time I saw him. I spoke to him this week, just gone too, by the way. So, yeah.
Do any of you guys have the same story about your daughter is to blame for bringing you into this? Because with me, it's exactly the same. It was my daughter that told me I must watch Making a Murderer on a night out. Forgot about it for 2 weeks, never thought anything of it. She came back to Galashiels for a weekend home, and she sort of frog marched me and my wife into the lounge, got hold of the remote control, says, "You're sitting there, you're watching this." How did you get into it, Tracy?
Pretty similar, actually. My daughter and husband were watching it, and I was in another room, and my daughter came in, Rhiannon, and she said, "Mum, you have to see this." And I was like, I could hear Brendan's voice. So they were at the point of the interrogation, and I could hear Brendan's voice, and I walked into the lounge room, and here I am. So, for Rhiannon and for my husband, they were able to put it aside and move on. For myself, it just began an odyssey, which, like Mark, will continue until they're free.
Well, yeah, I mean, what is quite interesting is that for the last, I would say, up until, well, particularly because of the trip to Australia, and then up until I actually brought Eunice to the rally with me last year, I would say that both, basically all of my family have been pretty annoyed at me being obsessed by it. And they haven't been sort of quiet about it. They have given me quite a hard time. And when I got to go to Australia last year, I mean, Eunice didn't speak to me for 3 days. She was so jealous, and so I had to bring her to Manitowoc last June just to sort of pacify the situation, And now she's getting more and more into it, What about yourself, Roel? How did you?
Yeah, it's quite a long time ago, and I don't know exactly how it went, but I was watching a Netflix series with my wife, and always looking for new series to watch, and I think I saw it being mentioned somewhere on Facebook or whatever by someone. It was not my daughter or son in this case, but I came upon the series, and we started watching, and my differently on the series because, my wife fell asleep during the series because it's spun out. It's taking time. It's not a very fast-paced series. So you need to be interested in what's going on, and then, well, she couldn't keep the concentration, and she fell asleep. So she said, well, you look the rest of the series. So after 2 or 3 episodes, I watched the series, the rest of the series, and I thought, oh my God, what is happening here? This can't be real. And I remember after watching the last episode, going to Google the current situation on the internet, and I thought, well, they must be out for years now in the meantime. And how astonishing it was to see that they were still in prison, and that's now 2 or 3 years ago. Can't remember.
I think
exactly.
I said that to Paul before on one of our conversations, that when I watched it, I had hoped it was a social experiment, that at the end of it I was going to find out that this had been an experiment or
staged.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to believe that was something that had actually happened, and that they were still incarcerated.
Well, I was that naive. I actually watched it, and halfway through, I'm thinking, okay, so everything's going against Steve and then Brendan. So you get to series 7, episode 7, and then I'm starting to think, when is all this going to get resolved? And it was as we got into the end of episode 8, I'm thinking, this isn't going to be resolved. This is going to be, well, just how it ended with, people of the world, help me if you can.
Yeah.
But first, when Stephen is being convicted, there is some thought about, well, they might convict Stephen, but they could never in the world convict Brendan. How did they find him guilty?
4.5 hours. 4.5 hours it took that jury to take that boy's life.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
One of the points of thousands of points that always troubled me was why is it that a confession, alleged confession, holds more weight in the minds of a juror when the person allegedly giving the confession recants it in a court of law under oath, under the pressure of prosecution, and didn't falter one bit, which he never would, Brendan. Because Brendan tells the truth. That's what makes it relatively easy.
Yeah,
for him.
I mean,
not easy for him.
All of the false confession experts would tell you that a confession is the gold standard of evidence. Like, it's so counterintuitive that a jury can't see past the fact. Why would somebody falsely confess to the most heinous crime you could possibly imagine? Why? I don't understand. He must be guilty. I think it's a very simple process for ill-informed jurors to arrive at a decision when they listen to a false confession, even if they've recanted. Because again, that's like, oh, well, now it's serious, and he's saying that he didn't do it. I mean, you only have to listen to, Professor Drizzen and Miranda's wrongful convictions, false confessions podcast at the moment, of how common this is. I mean, I think the Innocence Project released figures of 28% of exonerations are as a result of a false confession. Nearly a third.
And it's actually elementary psychology, because they see that confession, and if you're indeed ill-informed as a juror, you're not an expert, you're not, you haven't been schooled in law. All research that has been done on those things indicates that especially juries are susceptible to believing a false confession. And, well, I'm glad that in my country we don't have juries, because we would have far more wrongful convictions if we had that, because a prosecutor in our country and a judge can see past that confession, and they not always do. There are some cases in our country where a false confession has led to incarceration of people, especially the Arnhem Villa Park murder was in the news lately. 9 people were convicted based on the false confession of only 1 or 2 people who had been pressured very much by the investigators and police. And those 9 people who had nothing to do with each other. They didn't form a gang or whatever. They were just mentioned by the person making the false confession. But that's the exception in our country, and so it happens once in a while. But with juries, the chances of these things are very much higher than with just a prosecutor. And
particularly if you don't have a defense that brings on an expert testimony in false confessions. So, you're saying to yourself, where is the imbalance here? You've got a jury of peers who are ill-informed. They haven't been instructed by the defense as to how Brendan arrived at a false confession, So for me, I get a little confused with that, because I do blame juries to a certain extent for people being ill-informed. I think, since Making a Murderer, that you do have a lot more people who will be called for jury duty that will, have a far greater sense of, potential injustices, miscarriages of injustice going on in the courtrooms.
And since the Central Park 5, when they see us, I think more jurors will be aware now. But still, if you see the actual confession, it's hard for an amateur to weigh everything correctly.
If they're not instructed, they're not. And they've had no reason to be around, the criminal justice system, and they're not instructed by a defence. No chance.
But therein lies one of the basic, in my view, fundamental flaws in the process. And that is that a confession shouldn't be permitted without corroborating evidence. That's one thing. That's one point. And the other issue, Tracy, you touched on that percentage of 28% of exonerations involve false confessions. I think, in fact, when you cut that number down to those who are under age 18 or 18 and under, it goes up to close to 80%. That shows you the weakness that exists in the minds of children of that age. And if that isn't an indication to lawmakers that they need to have something in place here, I don't know what is. To me, it just seems opportune that they use these weaknesses, and rather than remedy them in terms of overall reform, they exploit them to their advantage. So.
100%, Mark. I totally agree with you. I think today I was participating in the live Twitter feed in regards to the Innocence Files, and one of the things that struck me is I think there's like a recipe for a lot of these false confession cases and a lot of wrongful convictions, and when I talk particularly about Brendan, and when I spoke with Professor Levine, who co-authored Under the Hood, she was saying that in the general population, there's around 7% of people would have a language impairment. In correctional institutions of any given kind, that can go up to 20 to 25%. But in juvenile populations, that goes up to 70%. So you've got 70% of juveniles who are carrying, a language comprehension vulnerability into an interrogation room. You mix that with, compliance, having no interaction with police previously. It's a recipe for disaster. There is such a lack of protections for juveniles in the interrogation room. but more so in that language space. I mean, I talk about this, and I've been quite obsessed about the under the hood analysis, and one of the reasons is because I think it supports the voluntariness issue for Brendan, because you have the trial court and you have the federal majority in the en banc who totally disregarded Brendan as he was. So who Brendan was didn't come into their voluntariness assessment whatsoever. But when you look at that under the hood analysis, who Brendan was and those vulnerabilities are the absolute reason beneath that false confession.
And I think it's a criminal act actually to give him the Miranda waiver and let him sign that thing, because he clearly couldn't understand anything of it.
Yeah,
and
I think one of
in general, in general, you shouldn't let juveniles sign Miranda waivers.
No, that's
and particularly with someone like Brendan with the Miranda. I think I did do an image of the Miranda, because I know in the under the hood analysis that they were just dumbfounded. You know, they had concluded quite correctly that Brendan has profound disabilities in this area. And in regards to the Miranda, I'm just having a look here.
I'm going to say, Tracy, do you want me to put up your slides?
Yeah, do if you don't mind, just so I can get it out of the way and you guys can chat.
We're only here because you're here.
Oh, don't be saying that. Too much pressure. But yeah, so with Miranda, understanding Miranda takes a full complement of verbal skills. Obviously, from processing verbal memory and on. But Brendan desperately lacked, in every single one of those areas. So if we can have a look at the Miranda warning itself.
Now then, which slide would that be? There's your first
Miranda
slide.
is number 6.
Number 6. I'll just go through them.
You're gonna give it all away. No, I'm only joking.
Because I don't know where.
You know, I did number them for you.
Right. Hold on a sec. Then, in that case, let's do this.
So basically, in Under the Hood, the Miranda warning is used as a piece of content that highlights the rapid and disfluent reading of Miranda by Wiegert. What it would have been like for Brendan to be on the receiving end of that Miranda warning. It's before a question is finally asked, there are 263 words and 15 sentences, many of which are syntactically complex. So have we got it? Have we got it yet?
That's number 6 of the 8.
Yep. Sorry. So they do have, they were numbered as such.
All right.
All right. So I can see it from here.
Yeah.
Keep flicking through, Paul, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. No worries. No, we'll find it.
I think it's really important, because Miranda on is where we lost Brendan. I think it might be your next one. No.
And go the other way.
Yep.
I didn't see one called Miranda.
Let's see, keep going.
Sure.
Oh, you're getting close. I can feel it. Come on, you do it.
It's a very slow computer, this, by the way. There you go.
Oh, there's Miranda.
There you go. There you go. Hold on a second. Let's see if I can.
So bearing in mind you have a 16-year-old juvenile who has no comprehension of what's actually happening at this stage, and I would hazard a guess he was frightened, and he's about to embark on an interrogation. They read him this as his Miranda rights, and unfortunately, they ask him, does he agree with it? Most people will have said, agree with what? Because of how little sense it actually makes. But unfortunately, Brendan just said yes. So if we can understand this, but even people like Professor Levine and Dr. Sally Miles found this quite difficult to take in, let alone how this would have impacted Brendan. So if we just quickly read this. Before I ask any questions, you must understand your rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to talk to a lawyer for advice before we ask you any questions and have him with you during questioning. You have this right to the advice and presence of a lawyer, even though you cannot afford to hire one. We have no way of giving you a lawyer, but one will be appointed for you if you wish, and when you go to court. If you wish to answer questions now without a lawyer present, you have the right to stop answering questions anytime. You also have the right to stop answering questions at any time until you talk to a lawyer. I have read the above statement of my rights. I understand what my rights are. I am willing to answer questions and to make statements. I do not want a lawyer. I understand and I know what I am doing. No promises or threats have been made to me, and no pressure of any kind has been used against me. Do you agree with that? How could he, we know Brendan's compliant. We know that Brendan's quiet. He doesn't challenge authority. He didn't do that at school. I dare say he probably didn't do that at home either. There was no way that young man was going to turn around and say, sorry, I don't understand what you mean. And from there, it's just carte blanche then for the investigators. And they were vicious with Brendan. What they did to him was cruel.
Yeah, it's actually Brendan said must have thought something like, "If you say so." And what strikes me in this text is we have no way of giving you a lawyer. I don't think that's in the standard Miranda, and I also talked about this with Travis, and Travis said, well, it doesn't invalidate that Miranda thing. But it's strange that they say it. We have no way of giving you a lawyer or getting you a lawyer. I actually think they said of getting you a lawyer, but it's I don't understand why they would say it, and it makes the thing harder for Brendan to understand even more.
The big issue for me is that Brendan had no idea what this was really intended to be in terms of a protection for him, and they knew that as well. I mean, and why the Supreme Court have those special care rules is for this very reason, that Brendan had no idea what his Miranda rights meant. He had no way of understanding how to exercise them. He had no understanding of the consequences of not exercising them, and for them to do what they did and just accept his okay or whatever that was at the end there is just abuse. It's child abuse, and there's no escaping the reality of that. And that's what it boils down to. An adult has to really contemplate what all that means, let alone a child like Brendan, right?
Yeah. So there's 263 words and 15 sentences in that passage of narrative. And we know that Brendan, he would chunk sentences down to 2 to 3 words. Like the majority of his answers were 2 to 3 words. So for him to be, barraged with 263 words and a piece of content and narrative that he couldn't possibly have understood what, as Mark said, what he was waiving or why he needed rights. This is a young guy who was there because he wanted to help them. You know, he's told us that. But the ultimate question, do you agree with that? You know, Brendan was not going to turn around and say, I don't understand. It's just, it would not come from him.
And that's the evilness of it, that they would expect him to be able to answer that in his own best interests, right?
Yeah.
That's the truth he didn't know.
And that's why it's a pity that the case eventually didn't get into the Supreme Court of the United States, because we could have some guidance like you don't do Miranda waivers for juveniles, or at least for impaired juveniles or whatever. And that was a good chance, but it was missed by the Supreme Court.
I mean, the real test is this. In the absence of a confession, let's use this example. If Brendan had a lawyer sitting beside him during these interviews, the lawyer would have basically said to all the questions that we know were asked of him, don't answer that, Brendan. Don't answer that, Brendan. Don't answer that, Brendan. And if you then don't have a confession, what's your case against Brendan Dassey? There isn't one. There's no other evidence against him other than a confession. And if you can, that's why a confession on its own is so dangerous to Brendan, dangerous to justice, because it hasn't got any meat in it. It's just got the coercive behaviour of evil men trying to take advantage of a young boy for nefarious reasons. They were after Stephen Avery. Brendan was expendable capital in this case.
I think if you, when they did the analysis, they looked at the Crivets interview, and they found that even then that there was a narrative and a fluency from the investigators that had been pre-thought.
Yes.
So, you know, even at that stage, Brendan's vulnerabilities were being challenged, and they were being abused. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
And then if we just take this right to the end of Brendan's trial just for a moment, and you get someone like Tom Fallon get up there and tell the jurors, innocent people don't confess. I mean, that's just a straight out professional lie. And, you know, and you're a juror not really knowing much about the law, and you hear, I don't know whether Fallon was an assistant attorney general at that stage, but whatever, this esteemed lawyer saying innocent people don't confess, and when he knows that that's a lie, it's just absolutely evil in my view.
Yeah, I think it's. I'm
going to start putting up one or two bits of comment along the way.
Yeah, Paul, can we find the slide? I'll give you. I don't know if the numbers make any difference, but it's the one in regards to. It should be slide number 4. So it just shows the disparity in the number of words used between the investigators and Brendan. So if you can bring that up, I think it's quite startling when you see it in that aspect.
Sure, I'm just going to do this then, and yep, there we go, and they're all here. The photographs are all here. So if that's number 8, then this must be number 7, and it's the photos you want.
Yeah, so it's not that one, it's the next one there. Yep, you're nearly there.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And, right, so you're on another photograph.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Even though the teachers are getting great exposure. Thanks for that.
Are you in there? Where's you?
No, I haven't received it yet. Do you not know in Australia there's post is non-existent. So if you keep going, it's 2 up.
I'll get Captain Crunch to deliver it the next time he's sailing around that part.
Okay, so I think this is quite a startling and interesting piece of the analysis, and the number of words spoken. So the darker grey is the law enforcement, and obviously then it's Brendan in the lighter grey. So if you have a look, I'm pretty sure that this one's Crivets, and then this is on no, maybe, yeah. No, that's February the 27th. And then
That'd
you've
be
got
school.
the March 1st. So they spoke 3 times as much as Brendan. So how you can tell me that narrative was Brendan's on any level is just, unfathomable. It's it's.
Plus, you have the added energy, Tracy, of 2 officers, 2 law enforcement, energizing that side of the conversation. It's like, having to compete against 2 people, let alone the intellectual difference.
Yeah.
They're at him left and right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't understand the technique at all, because the most valuable thing of an interrogation is let the defendant talk. The more the defendant talks, the more truth you will hear, and the more chance you will get to that truth.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think throughout the interrogation, Brendan replied, I don't know, or I can't remember, 41 times to the policeman's 1,239 questions. And out of all of that conversation, he requested clarification only 4 times. So this is a young guy who's sitting there, not wanting to challenge anything that's been said to him, or not understanding what's being said to him. The police used a total of 18,325 words. Paul, we have another slide that just highlights this.
Yes. And is that the other one, the white one here?
No, it's a black one. I think it's the one next to it.
With all the numbers on it.
So perhaps your first one that you can see there.
So you want to go right or left?
Oh my goodness, which way are you?
Let's yes, go.
Throw the dice, Paul.
Yeah.
Throw the dice.
So it's the other way, is it?
No.
It's the other way.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Oh, okay.
Keep going.
Yep.
Yep. Next one.
Next one.
This is what really stuck with me.
Sure.
I seriously, for people of, normal intelligence, I hate to use the word normal or average, I think anybody would struggle with this. So the investigators used a total of 18,325 words in the 2 interviews that were focused on in this report. Brendan used a total of 6,998, making his contribution a mere 28%. So they're asking 1,525 questions, which is equal to 6.68 questions per minute. This equated to 1 question every 9 to 10 seconds. And many of these questions were asked back to back, making it unclear which question Brendan was answering or had to answer. When they did the transcription of the interview, the transcriber, who, they're master's level speech language professionals, faced challenges transcribing the interviews, not because of Brendan, but because of Wiegand and Fassbender. Their speech was rapid, they had run-on sentences, unfinished thoughts, making it difficult to interpret the thoughts expressed. Can you imagine how that landed on Brendan?
Well, going back to this 6,999, I'm sure that 6,000 odd of them was simply the word where he had just agreed.
Yeah, he
just went along with everything that they, whenever they wanted him to change his story.
Yeah. Well, he said yes 247 times.
Yeah.
Now, when he said no, and people like Hamilton, took this as Brendan resisting. A lot of those no's were I don't knows.
Yes.
And he also nodded right? Brendan nodded a lot. He nodded 236 times throughout this interrogation. But the thing is, he nodded to everything. So it wasn't like he was nodding to, you know, a question or a statement that he clearly understood. He nodded to everything. So that he nodded to gibberish. He nodded to, you know, formed questions. It really, you know, and like Under the Hood and like the interview that I did with Professor Levine, who was, again, very generous, a very clever, funny lady. You know, they weaponized language, and I believe that they weaponized language because they knew that they could, that they had somebody, that they had a juvenile. They only had to look at his IEPs in the school record to know who they were dealing with. You know, everything was there. Everything was there before they began any of those interrogations to show that Brendan had language impairments and severe disabilities in that area.
Yep.
Let's come back.
The common man could judge that anyway, let alone a professional.
Yeah, but getting back to that sort of, as you were saying, Mark, this business of, you know, why didn't they put as much weight in Brendan, retracting those statements? For me, it's just it's just the public, you know. It's, you know, the jury. It was decided by the public that Steve was already guilty. You know, that it was a slam dunk. You know, as far as people there were concerned, you know, you've got people incredulous as to why does it even need to go to trial? You know, there's all this evidence. We don't even need a trial. So I think that's where you know, the jury taking 4 hours. I'm sure they'd already decided.
4.5 hours to take that boy's life.
Yeah,
like that is horrendous. But, you know, there's things like Professor Levine, when, you know, she was really, really moved by it. And she said one of the sequences, I'm just trying to find my notes on it, where she talks about Fallon, Edelstein, I think it is. Edelstein.
Fremgen and Edelstein, that's right, yes.
Yeah. It's, yeah, she says when Fallon gets up there and said, well, this is one of them. When Fallon gets up there and says innocent people don't confess, why Brendan's lawyers weren't on the table screaming bloody murder at that.
It was in the closing arguments. So they cannot intervene in the closing argument, can they?
But you know what?
Do it anyway.
If they just fucking do it. Like, the boy was 17 years of age. He needed everybody to stand up on those fucking tables and give it socks. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Completely.
Yeah. And she also said that another part was, again, with Edelstein. I have real issues. Kaczynski goes without saying. But I do have real issues with Edelstein and Fremgen as well. And Professor Levine, I quote, I read the whole transcript and I found the trial disturbing at the moment when the speech-language pathologist is on the stand. Edelstein moves on the speech-language records and says no further questions. And Professor Levine started to cry. Like,
well, the other one that I asked you about a while back was when Edelstein goes around the courtroom and says, you know, the state have brought in all of these bits of evidence. Did you find any of is any of Teresa or Brendan's DNA on any of these items that they fetched from Stephen's house, you know? And he says no. They had 5 days to clear it up. And that was the end of the court proceedings for the day. There wasn't even an objection to that, because for me, Mark Wiegert is not there to pass his opinions.
No.
In that sense, it's, you know, one would have thought there would have been immediately, you know, the defence for Brendan would have gone objection, and it would have been sustained. You know, that's just his his hearsay opinion.
There was no defense for Brendan.
No.
There was no defense for Brendan. Their defense strategy was totally flawed. Again, I've spoken about this previously. I was fortunate to speak to Dr. White, who had been retained by Stephen's counsel. And Dr. White didn't end up testifying for either Stephen or Brendan. But he did say when he heard that Brendan didn't have an expert testify in false confessions, that he felt sick. He felt sick and he felt worried. You know, and even now he said when he watched Making a Murderer, if he had known what he knew after watching that back then, he would have pushed real hard, you know, a lot harder to testify for Brendan.
Yeah. He said something. He said something like, "Well, I might not be the most appropriate person to do it, and that's why he didn't."
He recommended Dr. Leo at the time.
Yeah.
And Dr. Leo obviously went on to post-conviction in 2010. I think
it's already too late then.
Their strategy from my layperson's perspective is that they were going to use Uyghur and cross-examine him to highlight false confessions, the process of a false confession. What do you say to that?
I don't understand a thing of it. And what I also don't understand is why they removed the last part of the March 1st confession. The jury never saw him recanting when Barb went in the room, and he said, "Well."
They agreed to that. Brendan's own counsel agreed to that.
I can't understand.
Why on earth would you agree to that?
You've got to throw the kitchen sink at this, you know? Like, they're defense lawyers. They know how to defend someone, but they didn't know how to defend a false confession case. They were out of their depth. And for me, even there's a couple of months after Brendan's been charged, not charged, but been sentenced. And there's interviews on YouTube with both of them. And the lack of empathy that they have or show for Brendan or care is really, really quite disgusting, particularly when you watch something like The Innocence Files and you see how far lawyers go for their clients, how far Laura and Stephen have gone for Brendan over the past, since 2007. What Miss Zellner's doing with Stephen. You see that level of care, and then you listen to those two men. They knew they had a vulnerable child there. They just didn't care. They didn't care. I'm glad I don't understand the thinking behind that, but I really don't understand why they wouldn't have cared, because I haven't found one person that has not watched Making a Murderer that now doesn't care about Brendan Dassey.
Well, it was like I asked Jerry Butin the question of, why is it that Judge Patrick Willis, just deigns to everything that Kratz asks? And he said quite simple, because he was up for re-election.
Yeah.
And it was just public opinion at the time. These lawyers, they could have done far more. I'm sure they knew that. But, you've still got to live in that community, haven't you,
Yeah. Well, I know I've spoken to a few people, that were around at that time in the legal system. And they all said that they knew what was happening to Brendan Dassey. Everybody knew what was happening to him. And they knew that it was wrong. But for me, I'm just like, why didn't you step up?
But also what's interesting is the way that Ken Kratz, as lead prosecutor, goes about sending emails to various defense lawyers threatening them, like the one that was hired by Dean Strand to represent Jody, a guy called Chewing, and he's sending in emails, saying, don't you dare tell your client that she can't be interviewed by my investigators without you being present, and really quite a threatening letter. I'm sure there was a lot of shenanigans going underhand.
Yeah.
I mean,
any of those, if you've got prosecutors who are having to coerce witnesses, for example, if you've got jailhouse snitches, for example, if you've got any of those elements, it's a red flag. It's a red flag, It's like episode 8 today of the Innocence files. Watching that, there's this, it's like this tsunami of red flags, and at the end of it, you just go, why was there not somebody who wanted the truth, who was like, I don't have to convict. I'm not going to convict this individual. I'm not going to pursue this conviction because I don't have the evidence. Like, they took 2 years to build the case against the individual. Why would you need 2 years if you have a case? Do you know what I mean? Like, you've got Brendan, who was charged on the 1st of March 2006, and his trial. And he was convicted on the 25th of April 2007.
Today.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. Hence the emails app. But it's.
But isn't it the problem that the adversarial system in the United States invites the prosecutor to do anything to try to get a conviction instead of finding the truth, whereas the inquisitorial system, as is being used in some European countries and other places in the world, is more about finding the truth for the prosecution.
A lot of the time, it's just a pantomime, isn't it?
Yeah, it's who does the best show, and the one doing the best show is the one going to win the case. And if you win the case as a prosecutor, then you'll be rewarded, and people will re-elect you, and something like that. Even if it's a false conviction.
Because the US criminal justice system is also about trying to find the truth. It's just that they have a different definition of truth.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the end justifies the means, isn't it? Because as far as everybody is concerned, these are low-life people. If they didn't do this, they're going to do stuff in the future. They're going to be in and out in prison. Let's just put them away now and be done with it,
Yeah. So it's the minorities, it's the indigent. And I think, that, I don't think that that's particular to the US. I think we find that here in Australia as well, with our First Nation peoples and the Indigenous communities. It's, I don't think it's particular to the US, but I think we can thank Making a Murderer for making everybody care about the US justice system. Sure. I think, we look at, say, the Reid technique, for example, and I know people have said, that's not a technique. It's not a technique. Somebody just came up with that as an idea, and look what we got. We got a confession. Yeah. So, but it's not a technique. And in regards to Brendan and the Reid technique, they've said it wasn't even good Reid technique that was used on Brendan Dassey, Yeah.
But the bottom, you come back to that basic thing that we discussed earlier, and is that if Brendan had been afforded his due rights of having a lawyer present in the way that he understood, none of this, Brendan wouldn't have been arrested, Brendan wouldn't have been in jail. And so everything failed back at that preliminary level, and that is, at age 16, he shouldn't have been capable of being interviewed in this way unless a lawyer was present. That should be the law, as we've said. And that's your early piece of defense against abuse. And all the rest of it is just trying to justify what went on. But he should never have been subject to an interview like that. So,
no. Not even in Crivets. What were they doing in Crivets? Taking that child into the back of the car and manipulating his memory and manipulating, from the very, very beginning. They take him from not seeing Teresa to seeing Teresa within, what was it, an hour and 40 minutes or something in that car.
Yeah.
Everyone in the bus.
Car.
Yeah. Everyone in the bus saw him. You must have seen him too. And in at that stage, he's 3 or 4 times saying no, I didn't see her. And then, well, eventually he gives in already back then. So that's where it started.
Yeah. And Ali's right. I mean, the thing with the read technique is there's no scientific validity to that technique whatsoever. So it's absolutely bastardized by people to suit a means in a particular interrogation room. You know, just like the voluntariness issue, people will interpret it whichever way they want, and you know the courts allow that.
We'll get onto the control question shortly. I want Mark to give me that. Have we got any more slides that we can look at, please, Tracy?
Well, I did go into. I don't know if you want to touch on it, but you know, talking about the supporter initiatives.
Yes.
And I think that's something worthy of looking at, just because the support from people for, like, I do talk a lot about Brendan. As we know, I am 100% focused on Brendan. So that's the angle that I do come at. But I know that there's many people who advocate for Stephen who can, you know, take time over this weekend to put forward.
I wouldn't say 100%. I would say 110% Brendan and at least 10 or 15% on Steve.
I would say 150% on Brendan myself.
I'll never go above 100%. Being a mathematician, I don't think that's wise.
I'm not logical in the slightest. So yeah, I'll take 175% and keep going.
I was going to ask Roel a question that arose in my mind earlier. You know, Mark was saying that he's watched Making a Murder first series 13 times. Is that some sort of mathematical brain that sort of keeps track of how many times? I have no idea how many times I've watched it, but I mean I've watched it over and over again.
Yeah, well, actually, we as mathematicians call this an estimation.
Right. Okay. Which slide am I estimating to hit next?
All right. Well, I'll go on to the supporter initiative. So if you go on to the next one.
Yep.
We discussed, you know, I would talk a little bit about what I've been involved in and the amazing people who support as well. So in 2017, I had come off of the back of helping Sean Atwood with on Making a Murder Up. So I had offered my services as copy editor. And it struck me that I work in the digital space. I've worked in communications and PR for years. Why do I not, you know, have a website for Brendan? There's no dedicated website for Brendan. So previously in 2016, I had put tested the waters and created a Wikipedia page for him. So when I first started getting involved, for me, it was like there was, you know, search engine results were in the millions for Stephen. Thank God, right? So we want all the awareness that we can possibly get. Brendan, there wasn't. So for me, it was like, okay, I've got to do what I can do in the social space to try and raise, you know, the level of awareness for Brendan. So there were a few people that watched me do that first Wikipedia page, and it took 4 weeks because you're at the mercy of about 1,000 different editors. But so from there, anyway, so then we go to working with Sean. And then I created the website. Now, the website for me is an absolute labor of love. It's been visited thousands upon thousands of times. And one of the things that I love about the website is the 2 main pages that get visited. The articles, which is fantastic, but the main one is the Contact Brendan. And I absolutely love that because it means people are coming to find how they can contact Brendan or what they can do to help Brendan. And in terms of, you know, things like bounce rates and things like that as well, it's very low on the site. So people are coming to find information and they're staying to read it. And in terms of how people are getting to the website, I would have thought that people would come through via Facebook, where I would, put up a link or something like that. But they don't. The majority of people come to Brendan's website through search. So that's them just putting his name into a search engine and finding the website that way. Again, for me, that's fantastic, because that's people looking for Brendan Dassey, looking for information on Brendan Dassey. And that's not, people coming from necessarily the MaM community or anything like that. These are people that are coming from everywhere to find him. So
what I'll do
really
is, I think most of the people will know where that site is, but maybe if I in the description when this video finishes, I will put the link to the Justice and Freedom for Brendan Dassey site, just in case anybody hasn't already been there. Okay,
that's great, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
And then if we go on to the next slide,
left or right, which
the
go
t-shirts, the one that we've had up a few times. So this Excellent. So at the moment we're in the second phase of a merchandise run for Brendan. Yep. The wonderful Scottish lass Tracy Miles designs and coordinates these.
Yep.
And due to phenomenal demand, we're doing a second run on them. Now, myself and Tracy a couple of years ago, we discussed the look and feel of approaching this as like branding. And yes. So you'll from the website to I do the Brendan Dassey project page as well. I try to maintain that continuity of branding across everything. Mm-hmm. So last year was the first time that we did merchandise, and thousands was raised, and it was split between Brendan's commissary and Brendan's legal team. It will be again this year. But the main thing is, you're giving these amazing people who support Brendan, who come into the pages every day to find out how he's doing, something tangible to show their support. And, people wear them with pride, and it starts conversations, and it's fantastic for social campaigns as well. Like 5-10 people wearing a t-shirt can be used in so many different ways to support Brendan. So,
What is the writing on the back of the shirt there? What does that say?
I can't read it. It's a quote from Brendan. Cindy,
something about angels.
Yes. So it's Cindy Ann went to visit Brendan and told him that we were, if he was happy for us to do a run of t-shirts, because we would never do anything without Brendan's approval or Barb's approval. Right. And Brendan said yes, and he said, this is a quote. I'd love for this quote to be on it, and I'd love an angel to be on it. So hence one of the designs, more or less. Tracy obviously put it together, and Cindy, but that design is Brendan's wish. So we feel very privileged to be able to do that for Brendan. But yes, it's talking about, basically people are his angels. Yeah. But, when you talk about the supporter initiatives, we've got the email zaps were on our 7th, which has just gone out. We had the open letter at Christmas to Governor Evers. There was over 700 people that contacted me within like a 36-hour period. It was absolutely nuts. To make sure that their names are included. The amount of people who are participating in the email zaps increases every time the call goes out. The whole idea is to get those emails into the Governor Evers' inbox in a way that they can't segment them and put them and block them and stuff like that, and just to show that the support is there. And the fact that it grows every time that we do it. We do target a few different individuals, and one of them was Andy Thompson from Post Crescent. And he mentioned the support and the emails in one of his recent articles. So that was a win for the email zappers. So now we're going to leave Andy alone, and there's a few others that have been added to the emails app instead. But
about those emails, I also sent a few. And at the first email, I got a response, an automatic response, auto reply, of course. But it said, Governor Evers' office is going to answer you. Yeah. Has anyone ever gotten a personal reply on any of those emails? Because all I get is warnings about coronavirus. I am on a mailing list now, and even if I don't live in Wisconsin, I get warnings about how I should behave in Wisconsin because of the coronavirus. I don't understand any of it.
No, as of this date, no, we haven't received anything back, but that's not a surprise. If we were to receive a personal email, referencing what we're doing, I would think it would be inappropriate, to be honest. I think that he would be dealing with Brendan's legal team rather than, over 200 people who are saying, like, release Brendan, pardon Brendan, commute Brendan's sentence.
Tracy, I did notice, I think a couple of days ago, I got obviously it was directed generally, a reply from Governor Evers. And in that reply, he talked about his actions in respect of people in prison in Wisconsin. It didn't go to the heart of what we were after, but it seemed to me like he was mindful that was a question being asked of him about.
I mean, they can't escape it. It's in Brendan's prison at the moment anyway. Since the 17th, when we did one on the 17th, the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, there were 8 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Oshkosh. That hasn't changed, thank goodness. That hasn't changed. But having said that, the testing hasn't changed either. So it's not like they're doing a lot more testing so that they can, have a true account of the amount of people within the facility perhaps that are carrying the virus or asymptomatic and carrying the virus. But it's the most populous facility in the state. So I think at the immediate, it was kind of like, oh no, this is just going to grow. This is going to grow. Thankfully, it's not in Brendan's unit. So that is something that we're very thankful for. Unfortunate for the individuals that, have been diagnosed with it.
But is there isolation being done for the people that have it? Because testing is useful if you take actions based on the results of that testing. But if you just say, well, we know now it's in there, and we can't do anything about it, so it will spread, so it's no use doing more testing.
I believe the unit itself is isolated because it's contained to one unit. Yeah.
Okay, so they don't do any testing anymore in that unit because anyone who gets sick will probably have the coronavirus, COVID-19, and the first case in another unit, they'll probably be testing again.
Yeah, because if you look, anybody can go onto the Wisconsin Department of Corrections website. There's a tab there for coronavirus, and you can go on, navigate your way through it and get the stats for all of the facilities, the correctional facilities in Wisconsin. But yeah, so the amount of testing hasn't increased. The amount of positive cases hasn't increased. But as we know, up to 78% of the general population, according to the British Medical Journal's recent research, are asymptomatic. And I remember reading an article recently where a spokesperson for the Department of Corrections was like, we don't know how this got into Oshkosh. And I'm like, how do you not know about people being asymptomatic and carriers, not necessarily, having symptoms themselves, but passing it on? Because that's obviously what's happened. It's come into the facility through one of the guards. So unless they test at least all of the guards, they're never going to get true numbers of the people in facilities who have COVID-19. But for the moment, small mercies that that it has been contained to one particular unit, and the numbers haven't increased. So.
Sure. Any more slides?
I think we're done with my slides. Go.
I don't think so. I want a bit of explanation of some of the other ones, because they didn't all make sense. Did it make sense to you, Mark and Roel?
Perfectly.
Did it? Well, okay.
What didn't make sense was the way you were scrolling back and forth. That was the problem. But I did.
Yeah.
Can I just add one little?
It was a bit random, for sure. It was a bit random.
Can I just add one little thing? I'd be remiss of me not to mention this, because we talked a little bit earlier about law reform, or touched on the issue. One thing which we talked about people juveniles not being able to waive their Miranda rights. We believe that should be a change. But this whole issue about prosecutorial immunity is like the big thing. You give consequences to bad behavior, and you watch people change their behavior. And in all the the confession files, or whatever the Netflix documentary we're watching, it's all got to do with bad behavior, and prosecutors feeling totally comfortable in doing so.
Yeah. Because they can get away. They can get away with it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a child. If you're not berated for doing something, you're going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
It's.
And boy,
anyway, I just wanted to throw that in, because it's such a big issue in my mind that it's that is one of the top issues about law reform. So and there should be consequences. It's one thing to be incompetent and hopeless, and you might not forgive but understand that, but to have a willful intent to do something illegal and improper is just never acceptable. And you fix that issue and you'll fix a lot of the issues.
Yeah, there's no accountability. There's no accountability whatsoever. I mean, let's look at Mr. Kratz.
Oh God,
Mr. Kratz.
Do we have
look at the presser that he gave. There's been zero accountability.
Yes.
I'm sorry to bring it down to that level. to mention Mr. Kratz once again.
But in the Netherlands, he would have been fired. I'm sure. In the Netherlands, he would have been fired if a prosecutor had done something like that.
And Wiegert and Fassbender. When Drizzen was across in the UK, I was remember he tweeted about going to a show in Birmingham, and somebody came up to him who was a detective and said, "If I'd have done what Wiegert and Fassbender had done, I'd have been out of a job as well."
Yeah.
Anyway,
but yet they've gone on to sheriffs and goodness knows what in their lives.
Who's typing there? Someone's typing very loudly.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's my son who's at work a few yards from across from me. So I'll press the mute when I'm not talking.
So what about the next slide then? So words of encouragement there, Tracy, from Hugh.
Cheers, Hugh. I'm just somebody that you wind me up and I don't stop. So you have to take me out.
Sure. Let's have a look at these slides. I'm fascinated to see what else we've got on these slides that you sent me, and you can. So all these people, or
absolutely. They're all amazing Brendan Dassey supporters, and a lot of them, of course, are Stephen supporters. But they're in the Justice and Freedom for Brendan Dassey family Facebook group.
And from what countries?
Okay, so we have young Tracy, who designs and coordinates it, and she's from Scotland. There's quite a few ladies there from the UK. The UK represents really well. And we've got the US, we've got Slovenia is there as well. I'm just trying, who else? I think that kind of covers that little section.
I mean, these will be people that have sent you back the picture, but there'll be other people as well that you'll have.
Oh, of course, I mean the T-shirts. are being delivered every day. So every day we'll get more people put up pictures, but it's just, the post is just so random at the moment all over the world that, you know, it's a shame that they're taking their time getting them out. But, I mean, even at Brendan's website, when I do the analytics on his website and I have a look at the different countries, you know, there's people in Russia, there's Mongolia, there's at the time of the coronavirus hitting its peak, there were people in Italy looking at Brendan's website, you know, Ireland, UK, you know, far-flung places, South Africa, you know, Cambodia, I think we had in Vietnam, and it's so broad. It's so broad. But it's fantastic, you know.
Well, I remember the dude shared me the analytics of one of his videos where he'd got views from 50 different countries, including Morocco, because I was in holiday in Marrakesh at the time. So,
I wonder if you looked at the website then, because I've had someone from Morocco. But I mean, if you go into the groups, you'll find, and I think it's really, really important. You've got your first wave of support comes from the US, and if you get down into the weeds on that, you've got a large contingent of people from Wisconsin itself are in the groups, which is fantastic. And then you come out to the UK, huge support in Ireland, Australia, New Zealand. You know, then you've got Norway, the Netherlands. Really, there's not a country that's not been touched, I think, by the tales of these two men. You know.
Yeah, well, I think every English-speaking country you'll get them from. For example, I'm sure you get quite a few from Canada.
Oh yes, yeah.
As you say, Europe in general, as you say, South Africa, crossing Australasia, even Crunch Island.
Well, I'm yet to see Crunch Island come up, but I'll keep an eye out for it.
Okay, so
Tracy, Ellie is asking in the chat if you know about the 2 pending cases in Oshkosh.
2 pending cases. Well, the last time that I looked, there is 2 pending cases. They've completed 23 tests. There's 8 confirmed, 13 negative, and 2 pending. What unit they're in, I don't know. But all we know at this time is there's nothing in Brendan's unit. Would it stand to reason in the way that this spreads that perhaps those 2 pending cases, if they're positive, are with the unit that has the 8 confirmed cases? I don't know, but those figures are particular to the inmates. There's another section on the website that deals with the guards, and there hasn't been any to date.
Which is why some of the guards must have been an asymptomatic spreader.
100%.
Because 100%. Otherwise, the inmates can't have had corona in any other way.
I know they stopped visiting quite quickly. You know, and if it had been somebody that had come into the facility that was visiting, you would imagine a far greater spread than you know, the 8 cases, and those cases trickled in. So at one stage there was 1, then there was 3, and thankfully it hasn't grown from that 8. See, 24 total, 8 positive, 14 negative. Okay, so there's another. Isn't that interesting? Another because 24. Okay. Well, it's still good news though. So that's the important thing.
You mentioned Canada. You get support from Canada?
We get support from everywhere. Yes, support from everywhere.
I'd like you to meet my good friend from Canada.
Hi, Canada.
Fleetside.
We stand on guard for thee.
How's it going?
Good. Hi, everybody.
What time is it in Canada then?
Hi.
Actually, the clock hasn't started yet. It's still early. It's almost 6 o'clock.
My goodness. That's some commitment. Tracy, you mentioned about your, obviously we sort of saw the picture of the T-shirts. Yeah. Mark, can you tell us a little bit about the T-shirts that you were involved in manufacturing in support of Brendan?
Was I? Oh, yeah, I guess I was.
Listen, I'm not taking all the blame.
I love how you just palm these things off onto someone else, Paul. So
that's the beauty of being the host.
So my involvement was in design skills, not in much more than that. But it was the control question T-shirt, I presume you're associated me with, and that was produced in a few versions, but we're really focusing on the very important issue about the control question issue with the interview of Brendan, and whether that question indicated he was telling the truth or not, and how that got misinterpreted by the on-bank majority, I think not just in mine, in most people's opinion. I don't think the detail so much is as important as to understand that there wasn't, how should I say, there wasn't goodwill towards understanding what was going on here. And I don't know how you can have 7 learned judges coming to a different opinion about a factual matter like that. You know, it's not just a sense of something, it's a factual matter. And the way Brendan answered that question clearly showed that he what was going on there, and Judge Hamilton as the author of the majority opinion kind of seemed to be totally clear in his mind that it was doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, I think Hamilton undoubtedly thought Brendan had done it. And I mean, there's many instances in both the trial courts and the Court of Appeals where they just got it wrong. They talk about him being in regular classes, but with some special education help. Well, the thing is, Brendan being in regular classes for some of the school day is pursuant to federal law. So it wasn't that he was able for that. It was that he had no other choice. He had to, as his school notes tell, he was hopelessly behind and was at best a passive observer in his classes. And I think they also talk about, Brendan's flat, low-key demeanor during the interrogations. And that played a significant role in their interpretation of the voluntariness issue. And as a speech and language professional will tell you, what the court saw as Brendan being steady and composed was more likely an attempt to withdraw from the situation that was overwhelming. And an adolescent with language impairment may have learned over time to cover his lack of understanding with behaviours that the untrained interviewer would see as an invasion, reluctance, dishonesty, or bad attitude, but it was Brendan covering his own, inabilities to understand what was going on. So they misinterpreted. And that's through them not knowing these things.
Not bothering to exercise special care, Tracy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you remember at the time, Mark, it was non-stop. Every video the dude did, he would go into the control question, wouldn't he?
He would.
To the extent whereby I would deliberately during some of our live chats, I would say, well, could you just go through this control question for me again? And then you went on and did a live chat with him, and I primed you and I said, just go for it, just ask him about the control question. And of course he just went on with it, So eventually we decided that we had to do something, didn't we?
And that was the production of the T-shirt.
Well, yes.
Which he managed with Tracy's great help in Melbourne to get Steve Prison to wear one, right?
I was about to say you got one of the most famous models to wear it.
That's right. It was like it was Christmas for Eric Jose when that happened. Like, he couldn't shut him up all night then. He was up. Oh my God. So,
But the photo is priceless. It's a case of simple logic, actually. If I look at it from a mathematical standpoint, then if someone says, I don't disagree with you, it's a very strong indication that he agrees with you.
Fleetside, welcome.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Sorry I'm late. You guys started without me.
Well, no. Tomorrow we'll do the seventh part of your series. But I was just wanting to get your thoughts. Obviously, I think you've mainly focused on Steve's case and the parsimony. But thoughts on Brendan?
Well, I think all the good thoughts are correct, and yet they got it wrong. Either and this is an esteemed court. So they either didn't do their homework, or we're wrong, or counsel that presented this was appalling. I mean, one of those three possibilities. I think we're right. I think counsel was fine, and I think someone either didn't do their homework or that was somewhat contrived and engineered. I'm not quite sure how they just happened to vote the way they did and have the result they did. It doesn't serve justice.
A lot of it again is interpretation. Sorry, Paul, but this is my thing, right? So it's like with the en banc, they talk about at no time did Brendan ask to stop the interview or request that his mother or a lawyer be present. And as Brendan's school records show, going along is what Brendan does. So in classes, he was described as a very quiet student, respectful to teachers, does not offer answers in class unless he's called on, and then he usually won't talk. Those judges would expect a child like that in some way to stand up to the police by asking for a lawyer or for his mother. Was ridiculous. And
remember that the way he did his homework was by guessing, which was exactly what he was doing also in those interrogations.
Yes.
Yeah. But is it up to like, it would seem to me it's up to the courts to lend themselves to the circumstance sufficient to understand that. Obviously, I shudder to think what's happening to justice in that shallow a setting. If they're not able to, the average person could reasonably look at the circumstance and lend themselves to the argument at least and test that hypothesis, and would know enough about human behavior, hopefully at that level of justice, to be able to decipher what's going on. And certainly didn't see that. I saw very sort of calculated and shallow. The outcome was pre-wired almost.
Yeah, it was very standard. Their assessment of everything was very standard. They didn't consider who Brendan Dassey was in their.
The human wasn't part of it.
No, not at all.
The powerful language of the dissenting view gives such weight to how intellectually corrupt the majority view was, because you wouldn't have such a polar difference between those two views if that wasn't the case. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah. That alone defines enough reasonable doubts in my mind.
Yes.
Right.
So.
Yeah, the average reasonable person knows. Like we are the average voice of the average reasonable person. If the average truther can figure that, now mind you, we've had a lot of time to look at it and study, but if we know enough to make the right call on that, the judges themselves, the justice system relies on them to be able to cut through and separate fact from fiction. They don't look for convenient arguments thrown on their table and deal with those. These are complex circumstances, and hopefully they can sufficiently lend themselves to the circumstance to make the right call. I just didn't see that.
No, I think that they hid behind EDPA. They hid behind EDPA, which is archaic standard at best. You know, so for them, I think that was an easy out of having to invest themselves into, you know, what is obviously a wrongful conviction. And like you said, Mark, when you have a 4-3, that is a split in the circuit, and that's usually one of the reasons that the Supreme Court will take a case.
Yes.
And the fact that the Supreme Court didn't was just.
I have an interesting proposition that I've put before. I'd be interested in everyone's view, and that is, if Brendan had won it at the en banc hearing, and let's say it was 4-3, do you think the state would have taken it to the Supreme Court? And part B to that question is, if they had, would have the Supreme Court heard it?
I think they would have done, and I think the Supreme Court would have listened to it, because I think that as soon as you had Hamilton dissenting in the original decision, the problem then was, as explained to me by Laura when I read it, was the fact that you had one reasonable judge who agreed with the original Wisconsin system before Duffin stepped in. Have I got that right?
Yeah.
And that's how EDPA works.
Yeah, I don't think the Supreme Court would have taken it either way.
You don't think?
Okay.
No, I don't think so. Because if we're looking at the Supreme Court, and I think there's four reasons as to why they hear a case: national importance, you know, the splits in the circuit, and I don't think that it hit on what they needed it to for them to hear it. So I don't think it would have mattered if Schimmel had taken it to the Supreme Court. I don't think they would have heard it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he would have tried, Tracy?
Absolutely, he would have.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think Hamilton went in after Duffin. That's a correction on Paul, I think, from Crockett.
Yeah.
So Duffin was the first one to overthrow, and then it went to the Seventh Circuit three judge panel.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean, they're always going to give deference to the trial court's decision, you know. But at a 4-3, I mean, in the Wisconsin legal system, people said that as soon as it was a 2-1, they knew that Brendan was in trouble.
Yes, because as soon as Hamilton, sides with the Wisconsin court system, despite, I mean, I've read through the entire Duffin decision, and I thought it was excellent, apart from the fact that he chooses not to uphold the ineffective assistance of counsel claim against Len Kaczynski. And I remember getting an email from Steve Drizzen, and you could tell his. I've got so many from him over the time, and you know it's great that they do get in touch, but you know this incredulity that they lost. Although Duffin sided with Brendan, they lost the ineffective assistance of counsel claim against Len Kaczynski. It's just bizarre.
It's because the standard is so low for the ineffective assistance counsel. It's so low. I mean, but that's true. It is. It's an issue. It's an issue. I think it's Strickland.
Yeah.
I mean, they went on Kyler versus Sullivan, but if you look at the habeas decision by Duffin, he had mentioned Strickland, and in the trial court, Fox had used Strickland, so they came into it with Kyler versus Sullivan. But the reason ineffective assistance of counsel claims are very hard to come by is because the standards are so low. It's horrendous.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to Roel and the Dutch system, as you were saying, they have it in front of judges, and I can imagine some people throughout the world are thinking, "What you've got a system where you've got people of the caliber of Hamilton operating in Dutch judging systems? Please assure us that these people in Holland, in the Netherlands, are not as politically corrupt as Judge Hamilton."
Oh yeah, politics is very much separated from the justice system in the Netherlands, so that's a good thing. I think I was surprised when I first read or heard that judges and prosecutors are being elected in the USA. But well, so many things are different in the USA, so that's just one of those things, I guess. But it opens the door for corruption in my point of view. And I think it's a good idea to let the justice system and the key players in that non-political. That's what actually happens in the Netherlands, and there is never in cases like this there is not one judge doing the conviction, and it's most likely 3 or in some cases even more. And I think they in most cases they even need to be unanimous, so they have to write a motivation for their verdict, which is being upheld by all of them. And that also gives the defendant, if he's being convicted, the tools to do a post-conviction thing based on the actual things why the defendant was found guilty. And that's the thing, if you have a jury system, the jury says you're guilty, but the jury doesn't have to motivate why they think you're guilty. So that if you start your post-conviction processing, where do you begin? How do you convince a post-conviction judge, which in most cases in the USA is the same one doing your original trial? How do you convince someone that if the jury had heard something different, they wouldn't have convicted you, because you don't know why the jury found you guilty? They don't know. In the Netherlands, there is a motivation for the verdict of the judge, which says the judges find this person guilty because of these and these and these and these reasons. And then you have something, well, to work on with your post-conviction lawyer, and that's, I think that's a better way of doing things.
Mr. Fleetside, do you like the Dutch system?
Yeah, well, it's in Canada, I would say it's very much, and per Australia, UK, it's not too far. It's not too much different from that. But in the US, I guess that aspect of politically popular, if you can't separate politics from the decision, I think in any of the systems, there's going to be that element where the judges have to consider the gravity of this thing. So rather than in abstract looking at objectively the merit of the case, they also commingle that with what's the implications here, and that might temper their decisions. But that latter part would be exacerbated in the US if politically your fortunes turn on that as well. It's almost a conflict of interest, and when you're and that's I understand that's a wall they try to carefully manage, but I'm not sure how well it's being managed. It may well have eroded to the point where popularity of the decision rules the day.
I mean, I just like the idea that. Sorry, Mark, you carry on.
I'm sorry, just a very quick comment on something that Roel said, that about the lower court usually being the court of first post-conviction application. I wonder I'd be interested to know the statistics of how many trial court judges granted a new trial on their own first decision. I'm sure that rarely, if ever, happens. And
very few.
Or you're just imposing a huge economic and social impost into a process that's never going to be successful. It should go straight past the trial court into some other independent form.
And the delay of many years to begin with, before you get your first real chance of doing something in the post-conviction stage, is after you have passed that hurdle of that trial judge saying, well, I already been there, saw that, I heard that.
We saw that issue arise in an interesting way in the staircase matter with the judge who, Paul, I'm sure you're going to remember his name for me.
Orlando Wilson.
Yeah, who admitted second time round that he shouldn't have allowed certain evidence first time round, but didn't allow that to any way overturn that decision in the first instance. He acknowledged his errors.
And then has the balls to say, and you hear that so often in the innocence files, it shows the system works.
No, seriously, give me a break.
There's nothing about that system that's working.
That's just unbelievable, seriously.
Yeah. But no, I was going to ask about the fact that what seems really nice about the Dutch system is that the judges are respected, that their opinions are respected, and a couple of things that I find interesting about this system. One of them is that the defense attorneys basically get the judges to tell the sort of the prosecution where they want them to go and investigate certain aspects of the allegations.
Yeah, the defense lawyers don't need to hire investigators or whatever. That's just not necessary, because the investigation is being done in a much more broad, independent way. There are exceptions, of course, with bad prosecutors, but they are really the exception. By far the most cases, investigation is being done into every corner of the case, and the defense lawyers can suggest lines of questioning to the judge, and can suggest lines of investigation to the prosecution. And if they don't, then they'll have to motivate to the judge why they didn't look into a certain line of investigation or questioning or whatever.
What was interesting for me was that when I went to Amsterdam to see David Rudolph and Jerry Butin and got the chance to chat with them, I also got the chance to chat with the host of the show, and the host is a prosecutor.
Willem Necker,
a Dutch prosecutor. But these guys have to be ethical, and I can't help saying that here in the UK we love the Dutch and the Dutch way of doing things. It's a very I suppose liberal way of doing things. It's just like they're just years ahead of everybody else who drags on behind and realizes, oh yeah, that's
maybe with the COVID response, we're actually lagging behind almost any country. But in the justice system, I agree with you.
Yeah, but I suppose it's an issue of sort of. When it comes to the COVID stuff, there are people that don't like their civil liberties being taken away from them, do they? We're seeing that in America, aren't we? Protests against the lockdown, and you could tell that was going to happen, couldn't you?
Yeah, protests are not needed here because we have already a very liberal form of lockdown. So they call it an intelligent lockdown. But actually, we're not intelligent enough to how to wear mouth masks. So we don't wear mouth masks because we're not understanding how we should use them. But we have an intelligent lockdown. I don't understand a thing about it.
Apparently, we're being told here in the UK that we should wear sort of make-do masks, some sort of make-do mask, and not to wear medical masks, presumably because that deprives the health service of a stock of.
And actually, there is a research that our own national health system has done about mouth masks, and they say, well, even a simple cloth or simple thing you create yourself will very much limit the spread of COVID-19 or any virus to other people. And so their own research shows it works, but they still don't get it.
Yeah, but I think personally that in regards to all the protests and whatever, and everybody's got the right to protest. And the way I look at it is, I'm just going to stay home. And you guys can go out there and you can protest and you can spread COVID-19 and you can fracture your health systems if that's what happens. But I'm going to stay home, and then once this is under control and I feel like protesting, I'll venture outside and protest then. But
the problem is they will take innocent others with them, and that's because they actually are in the same supermarket as the people who stay home as much as they can, and they will still get infected by those protesters who don't keep their distance.
I don't know. For me, it's a no-brainer.
A peaceful protest with social distancing. I'm not against that by principle, but they, what's being done in those protests is awful.
I don't feel like my rights have been taken away by the fact that my local government here in Victoria is, asking me to stay home if I can. I see that as, protecting the front line. I see it as protecting my children and my husband. I have 2 elderly parents, one who's recently gone through cancer treatment. I'm not going anywhere near them, and I don't see the being asked to stay at home as an infringement on any rights. I just see it as common sense, But at the same time, people can get out there and they can protest about whatever they want, but good Lord, the amount of conspiracy rubbish that gets thrown around.
We all drive on depending on what side of the world you're on, we all drive on I'll use the word, the correct side of the road, not because we're forced to and there's a penalty if we don't, but because we fundamentally understand that that's a good thing to do. And we abide by the isolation rules and social distancing rules or we should at least, because we fundamentally know that that's a good thing to do. And that's your duty. If you live in a society, part of your responsibility is to your fellow humans.
Yes.
And it's as simple as that from my point of view. I support what Tracy says 100%. Would I rather be out there and being able to do the normal stuff? Sure. Do I understand why I'm not? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
that's it in a nutshell, Mark. That's perfectly said.
So I think Australia is doing a good job in COVID response, in my opinion, and New Zealand, maybe even better.
I think the U.S. is doing quite well, relatively speaking. So I'm not sure that the protests. I would never accuse the mainstream media of being very objective in giving you the circumstance. But the one thing I would add, I think absolutely correct. It's in the overall greater good, and so each person knows that what they should be doing. And I'm absolutely amazed, certainly here in Canada, and what I've seen in the U.S. is the compliance is pretty well total. Like I'm absolutely surprised that human nature hasn't taken it down to different paths. I'm kind of pleasantly surprised there. But I think also in the U.S. certainly, or for all of us for that matter, if the trust is not there, each time the system ratchets forward a piece of power, regardless of the pretext, your civil liberties erode. And from my standpoint, I would encourage everybody to keep on their dashboard, certainly the health and safety side, but you've got the economy and you've got your civil liberties. So and obviously health and safety trumps everything. So you knee jerk there, but you meanwhile keep an eye on your civil liberties. So for example, where they're putting in practices, I would be interested in seeing the sunset provision on those, should things return to normal. And with every breath where they talk about extraordinary powers for the state, I would want them to flesh out how we get back to normal, lest we end up in some kind of a fascist type system, which is where this can naturally erode. You give all governments emergency powers, and yikes.
What's interesting for me is that when it comes to this queuing up, for example, to go into the supermarket, and the social distancing, that's actually not a bad idea to begin with in the first place. That you shouldn't, be in somebody's face when you're speaking to them, and so when you're at the checkouts, you keep a certain distance, and when you queue up, it's far more respectful. I'd love to see that kind of queuing in airports, for example, when we do get back to normal. The keeping the distance and everything.
But even on election day in Wisconsin, there was a spread. We have seen an increase in the spread of infections in Wisconsin because of election day, and people tried to keep their distance when they were queuing up for those elections, but still. So the 6 feet is not a guarantee, and in some circumstances it's quite enough, but in some circumstances it's way too low.
The Wisconsinites have Voss and Fitzgerald to thank for that.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, can we go back to another one of Tracy's slides? And,
you do love my slides.
I do love your slides.
We all do, of course.
If somebody sends me a slide, I'm going to show it. It needs to be shown.
I don't know what slides are there now.
Well, we'll go through them. All
right.
So these are the t-shirts that you have done.
Those t-shirts, I tell you, see how good they are for raising awareness. How many times have we seen them now?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great marketing.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark.
I said great marketing.
Yeah, and have we figured out what's on the back of them?
No, I can find it, but just means
Save that for tomorrow. So,
what else have you got? There's a couple of quotes. This one was quite powerful as well. I mean, the whole. If people haven't read Under the Hood, Under the Hood analysis, Brendan Dassey, Language Impairments and Judicial Ignorance, I'd highly recommend that they do. It's available. If you just put that into a search engine, you'll get the PDF come up, because it's just full of. It gives voice and reason to everything that you think, but you didn't know how to orate it when you watch the interrogations. So like here we've got the report of Brendan's scores is a devastating document. It makes clear that Brendan's overall impairment level was in the most severe range, and that at 16 he was functioning like a much younger child. Test results range from 5 years, 8 months to 11 years and 9 months. His total language score placed him at the first percentile, indicating that 99% of kids his age understood and used language better than he did. Most of them much, much better.
And was this the Under the Hood? Was this part of the amicus brief? Remind me, is that? It
became part of the clemency push,
right.
But Professor Levine and Dr. Sally Miles were doing it as a matter of course, and they contacted Professors Drizzen and Miranda to let them know, of course, because it was their client, that this is what they were doing. And I think it was Professor Levine watched Making a Murderer first. She had known about the case, but she watched Making a Murderer, and it just set her off. And then she encouraged Dr. Miles to watch it, who would never watch something like that, she said. And Dr. Miles watched it and couldn't stop talking about it. And said, we have to do something with this. And both of them, Dr. Miles is a speech language pathologist, and Professor Levine has been a public defender and a professor of law and an attorney, defense attorney, and what have you for 41 years, I think. And she's also she talks on language impairments in the judicial system. So for the two of them to come together, it was just like the perfect fusion of expertise. And they were they were astounded at what was found. I think the Fassbender and Weigart totally honed in on Brendan's cognitive weaknesses and his communication limitations. They were confronted with a kid who severely impaired abilities to process, comprehend, and manage language, and they fully abused that. They were vicious to Brendan, as I said before. So, but the analysis is just brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, and it really gives transparency to the different levels of Brendan's disability. And when we think about why do people falsely confess, and yes, there are many different reasons and circumstances why people falsely confess, but one of the main reasons that Brendan Dassey falsely confessed was his language impairments.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And another slide that maybe you can. Is this carrying on?
That's referring back to the crivets, and
Right.
they they had done an analysis on crivets, that they focused obviously on February and March, but we can read, we did run the analysis on the first interview in November, and Sally noticed that the percentages are the same. You see that this is where it becomes deliberate as to who does the talking. That style, she didn't break down the fluency. She didn't really go as far into the weeds as she did in the February and March interrogations. But she said someone clearly has got this in mind, that this is how it's supposed to happen. Poor Brendan. He didn't stand a chance with these people.
No.
Okay. And I think this slide is the same. Yep. And I think this slide is the one that highlights your web page. And then we've got, I think we've gone through. Yeah. And that's your pictures. And that's just to show that, yes, I have got a green screen. Yes. Very good.
There was a slide with a table on it. Did I see that wrong?
Yes, absolutely. That's
there is. Yes, there is.
As a mathematician, I'm fond of tables.
Yes. This is actually, I'm going to bring this up on my own screen so I can see it better. If I can get this.
Well, this is the chart, but there was a table.
Yes.
Yeah, it is a table. Let me see.
There you go.
Yeah.
Your cup of joy overfloweth.
Yeah, so this one's detailing the interview characteristics. So you can see on there that, for example, a Marinette up at Crivets, in terms of who did the talking. So you have Detective O'Neill spoke 6,234 words, and Brendan spoke 2,308. Again, we have this large discrepancy. So it tells you that this narrative was born from O'Neill. This is not Brendan. This is not Brendan. So, and then you go to the 27th of February, and it was a 41-minute. So you've got 3,215 words were Weigart and Fassbender, Brendan 1,257. Then we jump to the 1st of March, and in 3 hours and 10 minutes, you've got 15,020 words spoken by Weigart and Fassbender, and Brendan spoke 5,741. So they spoke 3 times as much as Brendan. It's so that's basically detailing. When it goes down a bit further, it details about the type of content and the type of questions. So, for example, I won't go into it too far. People can certainly have a look at this in the analysis, but you've got questions, yes and no questions. So at the March 1st, Weigart and Fassbender asked 577 yes or no questions. And they asked what, when, whys 562 times. and they asked 80 multiple choice, and they asked 18 open-ended questions.
That's astonishingly low percentage of open-ended questions.
100%, and totally against best practice.
Yeah. Because Brendan's supposed to give the story, not them.
Yeah.
Exactly. You let the defendant, you let the person who's being interrogated, you let him talk, and then eventually, if he talks long enough, he will give things away. That's the philosophy behind open-ended questions.
Yeah.
Roel, I've got a question for you.
Okay.
Tell us about your songs. What inspired your songs?
My songs, well, actually, I'm not only a mathematician, but also a musician.
Yes.
Sorry?
We're all musicians here.
Yeah. Okay. So actually, I have two jobs with. I started as a mathematical teacher, and but also as a choir conductor, and eventually my work in the educational sector went into doing more work in IT stuff. So at the moment I'm a consultant doing that, and that takes most of my week. But I still have one choir I'm conducting, and I did write musicals when, maybe 30 years ago. That was the last one. But I haven't stopped creating music, so arranging songs for choirs, but also composing new songs, new pieces for choir, and also creating songs with texts of things that keep me busy, keep me awake at night. So that's why I started to do my first song, Ain't No Saint, about Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. And it was, quite a success on YouTube. Many people loved it and listened to it. There are a few errors in that song because it was my first one. I didn't know as much as I do now about the case. So sure. I had a verse about item FL, which actually turned out to be about item FK, but well.
A letter here, there. I wouldn't wear that. There's many more typos in the Calumet report.
Oh certainly. I think I had two things wrong or so in that first song, and later on I did some more songs about Disingenuous Wisconsin and.
Yes.
The song about assistant DA,
yes.
etc.
Love that. Yeah. Love that. Very, very much. Dare I say, very much a sort of Gilbert and Sullivan style of sort of operetta. You know, it's you can tell you like the ascending chord progression with the diminished chord in there somewhere, and then resolve. Beautiful.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, okay, I love that comparison. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
I'd really like because I do this with all the guests that come on. Basically, if I can just explain, we know that things in the US legal system are wrong. We can see that Steve and Brendan are innocent. We can see what's happening there. And I would say since Making a Murderer, Netflix has bombarded us with. Now, I've got a list of 22 documentaries that I've seen, including Making a Murderer, that have come out since Christmas 2015. Okay. What I'd like to do is get your opinions on which ones you've seen, what you thought about them, you know, what we learn about them. I would just point out, just before we go into them, I would have loved to have had some of my pupils come on and join me on the chat that are preparing to go to university, and law school. But of course, you know, Making a Murderer is a documentary because the contents of it, I don't feel that it would have been appropriate to have asked a 15, 16-year-old student to come and discuss making a murder. I think you can see where I'm coming from there, you know. But having spoken with them, you know, extensively, the ones that are interested in going to law school, there's no doubt that these documentaries are going to have a huge effect on the lawyers in the future. And they're going to have this history of what Netflix have done. So if we could just go through this, and you can tell me which ones you've seen, which ones you've enjoyed, which ones you thought were particularly interesting. Okay, so obviously Making a Murderer is top of my list. Second on my list, you've already mentioned it, Mark, is The Staircase.
Yes. Oh, God.
What do you mean that?
You know, I don't want to minimize what you're saying there, Paul, but I can summarize all my thoughts about all those documentaries.
Well, we'll get on to the Tiger King, and we'll get your special thoughts on that in a minute.
Oh, you can skip it if you like. But the big thing is, to me, prosecutor misconduct. That's really what is at the heart there. The prosecutor is at the head of the team, so to speak, and misconduct is the theme throughout all of those documentaries, all of them. And that's the abiding emotion I have from that, is watching all of those things. And I still get emotionally furious when I'm watching these things, even as recently as this week when you're watching the Innocence Files. And I also watched that one that was, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact name, but, you know, the drug thing in Massachusetts. Oh,
how to fix the drug scandal, yeah.
Yeah, another example of prosecutorial or leading law enforcement misconduct. So,
yeah, I must admit, I've done a list of looking ahead, I suppose, to, you know, things that need to change, which obviously we can go through tomorrow with Fleetside. You know, ways in which we can hopefully change the system. Anybody else got an opinion on The Staircase?
I think it was a good documentary. I remember saying to David Rudolph that I thought the whole owl theory was incredulous. One thing Making a Murderer has taught me is not to make assumptions based on how I think something would play out. Do I believe Michael Peterson killed his wife? I really just don't know. I don't know, but I think from a documentary point of view, it's done extremely well, and it's really, you know, it's really quite engaging. And like Mark said, I think there's a commonality across these documentaries, almost an identical cast of characters. You know, you have the DA, you have the law enforcement officers,
the scientific experts, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, the Sammy Shabanis of this world, yes.
Yeah. So there's this cast of characters that runs through all of these type of documentaries, and you could put your money on it that they're on Netflix because that particular cast of characters have done what the previous cast of characters have done, you know. And it's yeah, I mean, it was a good watch. It was a good watch for sure. I think David Rudolph is quite exceptional.
He is indeed. Yes,
he's a very sharp mind, and he's a great orator as well. When we saw him in Melbourne, I thought he was a surprise. Put it that way. He was a surprise.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd had the benefit of seeing them before, David Rudolph and Jerry Butin. And what's funny was the fact that, and my wife still remembers this incident, because as we arrived at the theatre, Jerry arrived in a taxi, and then he was looking for money to pay for the taxi, and said, "Oh, Paul, can you give me 20 euros or something for the taxi?" So I gave him the 20 euros. I'm still waiting on them back. But listen, and you know, that's just the Scotsman in me, you know. He said to me, you know, he saw a piece of paper. He said, "Oh, was that a question?" And the first question that they did on the evening was the one that I'd asked, which is, who was the more unethical, Jim Harding or Ken Kratz? Would anybody like to give an opinion on that? Because I thought David Rudolph did a pretty good job of pointing out that Jim Harding did some pretty bizarre stuff in the staircase. And does anybody know where Jim Harding is now?
Is he a judge?
He's a judge. How did you
what
guess?
happens, isn't it?
They get promoted, right?
That is the career trajectory for this cast of characters. Like, yeah.
Okay, so Roel, Fleetside, any thoughts on?
Just I'm always wondering whether there's something special about making a murder that caused the truthers to gravitate there. Is there something? Was it Ken Kratz that galvanized? Or what caused this? Which I think is a tremendous phenomenon. But and will the other series captivate our attention in the same way? Is there something special about making a murder in your minds that because I watched the series, and as I recall the first series, and not being sure at the outset of that, I think pretty soon thereafter, and certainly by the second series, things came into focus. And so to me, it did seem fairly balanced reporting. And then, but we've done, the truther community has done extensive research. So there's something that captured their attention there and enthusiasm to really rally behind this one. Do you
that idea of the underdog, the idea of people who, are considered less than others. I mean, that whole idea is just disgusting, And I think one of the scenes that really gets to me is in the post-conviction when Barb and Dolores are sitting in the court and they have to hear the email be read out of what O'Callaghan wrote about cutting down, the family tree. I just think that was so disgusting, and for them to have to listen to that, and there was a palpable feeling that you had for this family, and
O'Callaghan and Kaczynski were for me even more of a drive to investigate time, to invest time into the case than Kratz actually.
I think Tracy's view about the underdog is true, and I think we can all in our lives identify with a family called Avery or like Avery, and we know in our lives we know Averys. There's this particular one that's the subject of the documentary, but we can see that family in our lives, and I think that's what connected us, and we can see how that could easily pass across to people, either ourselves or people that we know. And I think that really was the glue for most people.
And how that manifested with 40 years of persecution here is part of my concern. So in my little presentations, I try to bring it back to that context. But these, as you're pointing out, the families of a different how do you put that, different sort of pecking order in the eyes of some, but this is a 40-year persecution, and the events going back to the Bernstein circumstance. And so when you were talking about the read technique and the chart there with the number of words spoken, and I think somebody looking at that and assuming that these were reasonable people doing their reasonable best, and then somehow out of a lack of probity, but a weakness, a lack of due diligence, maybe they got overzealous, and so it was an unfair interview. But in my view, in the context of the 40 years, that's engineered. They were looking for places to fabricate. So we're part of our supposition is that they could have planted evidence and that could have destroyed evidence. And at every turn over a 40-year span, there's been I'm an engineer, so I use that term quite a bit. There should be no place for engineering a prosecution in this. It should be, you're assuming reasonable people making reasonable calls throughout. And this is a dimension that I think the Supreme Court didn't. Maybe there's no avenue for them to consider that larger context, but if so, I think we're missing justice. Justice requires all that context be brought to bear, and these clowns that went in and did certain things to an unfortunate overpowering Brandon. That's one tip of many, many tips in icebergs that of malfeasance over 40 years.
I think also in Fleetside, there's this other issue that, I mean, obviously there's been prior to, Making a Murder, other people who have been wrongfully convicted and so on. But for me, it was like a rude awakening that sense that we want to trust law enforcement. It finally hit home that I couldn't, certainly not in the US. And I don't mean that they're all corrupt. Clearly, the great majority of them are good, service officers doing a job, but you don't need many rotten apples, right? And it was a real awakening that this was normal. This sort of behavior was normal. And I didn't want to believe it, and now I do. And I think that's also made Making a Murderer, the public exposition of Making a Murder through the medium of Netflix and other forums actually started to make me and millions of others question how reliable that paradigm about law enforcement officers are always going to be honest and good guys. It broke that for me. So
it's interesting that everybody sort of approaches it from a different point of view. My immediate, because of my background, I think most of you know my background here in Galashiels and the people that I'm involved with and what I do. It's kind of like what you could say sociably and charitably. My immediate concern was, what on earth are Manitowoc Sheriff's Department doing about this? What on earth how can anybody possibly defend what I have just seen? And I just basically I emailed Robert Herman every day for 24 days and then said, look, you haven't answered my emails, I'm going to phone you. And in fairness, he took my phone call and we carried on several conversations. But this it was so obvious how wrong everything was. It was him that really confirmed, if there was even the smidgen of doubt of Stephen Avery being innocent, talking to him convinced me, because he was just so off the charts. When he turned to me and said, not turned to me, so he was on the other end of the phone. But when he said to me that, you do realise that not all of those 7 searches of Stephen's caravan were for hours on end. A lot of them were just 10-minute sweeps. And I just thought, that you're so embarrassed telling me that. And that's what really fired me up, because I've got a lot of friends who are in the police force, and I know that that's not how they would carry on. And that's what really got at my goat was, more so even than sort of feeling sorry for Stephen Brendan. It's how dare you lot besmirch the name of police by doing what you did.
Yeah. Well.
Anyway, sorry.
And they were providing resources. Was what Rachel said. Certainly the reporters weren't expecting human resources, were they?
Well, yeah. Sorry, Tracy, if you'd like to go to the private chat, Mark has posted what's on the back of the T-shirts.
Oh, yeah. No, I saw that Kelly had put it up in the chat as well.
Oh, right. So
it
says...
Yeah.
Can you read that, or do you want me to read it, or what?
Go for it. Go for it.
So this is from Kelly Droster posted this in chat. That's not from, I just transferred it. So it says, good friends are like angels. You can't always see them, but they're always there.
That's Brendan's words.
Yeah. Absolutely. Good stuff. I must ask, it's probably one of the ones that's hit me hardest of all the Netflix documentaries. Was Time, the Khalif Browder story.
Oh, very difficult to watch. Yeah.
Very, very difficult. I thought that was, in fact, do you know what? I've even had a guilter come on to me and say, you say you represent everybody, but I've never ever seen anybody of African origin on your any of your live chats, and I replied, well, you need to understand a little bit about world history. We are all African, because that's where we came from, darling. You know, that's where humanity started. So we're all African. But I knew what the person was trying to hint at, you know, which was ludicrous. But yeah, the way that Kalief Browder was treated was ridiculous. But in the end, he did posthumously sue for, I think it was between 3 and 4 million, didn't he?
I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Which I thought was interesting, because, you know, a lot of people have, you know, like Sheriff Peterson's coming out with this statement. You know, if we wanted to eliminate Steve, we could have just eliminated Steve. You know, we didn't have to frame him. Well, no, you had to eliminate, because these lawsuits still carry on posthumously, and Kalief Browder's lawsuit carried on posthumously against his 3 years wrongful incarceration. When in the end, they just dropped the charges, but they kept him inside for 3 years.
Over a backpack.
Yeah. And they didn't even have the witness there anymore, because the witness was from I believe from Mexico, and had obviously gone back. You know, they're not going to hang around for 3 years. Okay. We've touched on it. Anybody want to give me their thoughts on how to fix a drug scandal?
Oh, that's the last one I watched. I watched that just the other night. That's just breathtakingly unbelievable, especially in a progressive state like Massachusetts. I mean, that really shocked me. But as I said, you know, you had two willful employees doing bad stuff. Put them aside. Where were the checks and balances to control that? They weren't there in any measure. And then when it was known, then the deliberate cover-up of what was going on to minimize this issue. Thank God for that gentleman whose name escapes me, the defense lawyer, who was the sort of kind of the main
Luke Ryan was the bald-headed fella. The two attorneys from the Attorney General office described him as being an a-hole.
Yeah, well, he's a hero in my mind, in terms of his diligence to pursue truth. And the stuff that, you know, when they finally get inside the Attorney General's office to look in those boxes and find what they find. Yeah. It's just, oh my God, it just blows my mind. So,
it is difficult, really, isn't it? Like we watch these documentaries, and it's almost like a form of self-harm. You know, I'm reluctant to ever call them entertainment, but it's like a form of self-harm, because it's so disturbing.
Yeah, the system sort of takes on a life of its own, and I think all the players within it just consider it to be normal business, and they sort of wander off course. And as with that last one you were talking about, it takes a maverick to step outside that equation and say, wait a second, guys, the king wears no clothes here. This is where we're supposed to be, and they all seem to meander off the path. It's just that I think in Manitowoc, the meandering has clearly wandered outside the lines, not only of the legitimate underpinnings of of justice, but common sense. I mean, it's getting to be a ludicrous, and things have gone eerily silent there. You know, when the truthers started their quest, there is this. We were wondering whether it was a manufactured Gilter syndicate where they paid operatives. There were ridiculous retorts coming out all over the place, which only, I think, spurned on the truthers further. But just ludicrous sort of counterposition, and that's gone really quiet now. So maybe they stopped paying those operatives. I don't see the websites up there that used to be up there from some of the key players. I don't see the sort of gay banter with some of the players that we used to have. I wonder if is there a new gravity there? Are they finding, you know, have they seen something, and are they treading a more cautious path, or is this simply more tactic? You know, in some ways you would advise people like Ken Kratz not to talk, because he's just going to tie them in a knot. Why bother? If you've got the system in your pocket, then stay quiet. I would have thought that would have been good advice from the get-go. But I wonder what's going on there. Has something changed?
Well, he's MIA as well, isn't he?
Yeah, he is now, but he was very proud of his efforts before and pushing.
Oh, he
forward.
certainly was. Yeah.
Does anybody know?
Does someone know who the person is that is on his account now on Twitter? Because Ken Kretz, his account is reactivated again, but it's not Ken Kretz.
Slightly different handle though, isn't it? Slightly.
Yeah.
It looks similar to his first name. There's something different about it.
Well, I haven't seen Charles Darwin for a while.
No, he's up on the Beagle, right?
Yeah.
So,
But no, and anybody know how many people eventually, how many cases eventually got thrown out in Massachusetts? How many drugs cases actually got thrown out? 52,000.
really?
Wow.
God.
50. But when you combine Annie Ducombe and Sonia Farrak, no relation to John Farrak. Just make that
Slightly
clear.
different spelling,
Yeah. 52,000.
Look at
Okay.
the cost to the system. It's just unbelievable.
That's interesting. One of the things I've said to all of my pupils, I've said, your parents will thank me for telling you this. When you become a lawyer, you go into post-conviction relief like Kathleen Zelnick, you'll earn a fortune.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, number 6 on my list here is the confession tapes. And of course, there's 2 series of that. I suppose, Tracy, we better start with you, because Drizzen is in series 1, isn't he?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like the I gravitate towards the false confessions totally because of Brendan, of course,
Yes.
and the situation, and also because it's an area that I find infinitely interesting, and I like to inform myself in that area. But yeah, no, I like the confession tapes. I'm very much somebody, I wait for something new to hit Netflix in this area, and nothing has taken me like Making a Murderer. I haven't been as invested in anything except Tommy Ward, perhaps, to a certain extent. And I think, again, it's because it's that vulnerable individual. It's, the person with less capacity to defend themselves and things like that, again, the underdog, I'll always invest myself in more than anything else. But the confession tapes are good. The Innocent Man is good as well.
I saw the confession tapes first season. I think I didn't see the second one. It's on my list, but I think the first 2 episodes were about Canadian approach, Mr. Pig.
There was 2. Yeah,
it's 2 young lads.
2 episodes. Yeah.
It was very strange approach.
What's interesting, though, Roel, isn't it, is the fact that one of the things that Willem Nijkerk mentioned about the Dutch legal system is that they don't have such thing as a plea bargain.
No, it is. It isn't. You can plead guilty, but you won't get any thing in return. So you can't negotiate with the prosecutor and say, well, if I plead guilty, will I get 3 years or 5 years or 6 years? You are not getting any guarantee when you plead guilty. But if you plead guilty, the judge may take that into account with the sentencing. And so people still plead guilty, but only hoping that the judge will then have a verdict with a lesser sentence, a shorter sentence.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to get onto my favourite subject I suppose after Sheriff Herman, the second person I sent messages to and never ever got a reply from were the Green Bay Packers. and Mike Holbach. What on earth was he doing at sentencing saying that Brendan Dassey should have taken the plea deal?
Bizarre.
That's a guilty conscience. That's what that is.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Possibly.
I think a lot of what Mike Holbach did could be construed as questionable, being politically incorrect there. You know,
you mean deliberately perverting the course of justice?
I didn't say that.
Well, I certainly would. I find it incredulous that here in the UK we had a terrible murder in 2003 of two little girls.
I remember that.
Jessica Chapman by Ian Huntley, and his girlfriend Maxine Carr knew what happened, and she in a chat with an interviewer talked about the fact that one of the girls was going to be coming back to school. And, you know, she'd got this card at the end of the year, and she used the term, she was a nice girl. And immediately the investigative reporters picked up on that. Now, if my real bugbear is this, with the Wisconsin press, if Stephen Avery had used the word, imagine it, your thoughts on the Holbach family. If he'd have said, the grieving process could last, years and years and years, they would have taken that as an admission of guilt, wouldn't they? Mike Holbach says it. Nothing.
And it's not being picked up.
Nothing.
Yeah, but I think you're looking at a Wisconsin that had advocated for Penny Bernstein's. You're looking at a Wisconsin that this is a dairy farming family. Obviously, there's considered higher members of society than others and things like that. So I think that they were afforded a certain amount of leeway, but at the same time, I find it very difficult to comment too much about the Holbachs. They lost their daughter in the most horrific of ways, and how that's happened.
I understand that.
Question, but
I understand that, but I don't understand why no one asked Mike. Why did you say the grieving process could last days when she was missing? No one asked.
Well, they didn't ask it when he was on the interview with himself and Ryan Hilgast when they're being asked about being on the salvage yard, and it's obvious that they were and that they're lying because they signed in. They were never asked about that, but they don't have to. They don't have to answer. That's the difference. They weren't accused of a crime, and the investigation wasn't going there.
If any of my family went missing, I would be the last person on this planet to accept that anything bad had happened to them. I think that's just human nature. So for Mike Holbach to, you're saying, it's maybe a slip of the tongue, but they are the ones, the immediate family, who are the last to accept that anything, they would still, if somebody's missing, hope, there would still be that hope. To me, I think that there's never been anywhere near enough examination of not just what Mike Holbach said, but maybe Fleetside, maybe you agree with me. It's the complete lack of any kind of investigative journalism in Wisconsin until a certain John Farrack came along.
Yes. So in my view, I sort of separate the sentiment for the family from the sense of right and wrong. I don't let one play out, or try not to let one play out on the other. And in that regard, I would hold Michael to a tighter standard. I would want to, know those. I would want to know the answers to those tough questions. And we, as a truther community, aren't limited by, say, court procedure and that sort of thing. And so through a modeling lens, we're trying to say, well, in balance of probability, what likely happened here? The key demarcation point for me in the Holbach family was the Pam of God incident, something I would bring out in that presentation tomorrow. But the notion that the Rab is consistently green up until Pam of God, and then suddenly it's blue thereafter. The idea that the poster appears to have been made before she was missing, and the idea that nobody's looking for Teresa Halbach, they're looking for evidence. If I were the family and there was a finding, I would be there in a heartbeat, and I would be demanding that car be opened. Is she in there? Is there something that would give us a clue as to where she could be? But this whole thing came at it from a preservation of evidence standpoint. That's inhuman. And I don't understand that. So that's the dichotomy for me. Preservation of evidence versus safety and security of the individual.
And Pam, the first thing Pam said was we are at the salvage yard and we are looking for a vehicle.
Yeah.
No, why aren't you looking for Teresa herself?
Would you not? If you were the mother, would you not be there? I hate to be too judgmental because we don't know the circumstance exactly. There could be a good answer to that. It's just that on the face of it, wild horses couldn't keep you away.
No, exactly.
And that's an eternity of pain. That's not something that goes away in a few days. So there's some tough questions that somebody has to answer, and we're still probing for that.
Do we know, and it's not meant to be judgmental, do we know whether Mrs. Halbach ever came to the salvage yard at any stage?
No, as far as I know a member of Brendan's family reached out, and Mrs. Halbach didn't want anything to do with them.
Wouldn't you want to know
absolutely.
You want to feel a sense of what went on? Wouldn't you want to go there? As hard as that might be, you would still want to go there.
And don't forget that's a missing person case, right? That's not a murder case yet. So you would absolutely, the wild horses comes to mind. You would not be able to keep somebody back. She would be breaking into those lines and where's my daughter? So it paints a picture that perhaps they knew something else.
Yes.
And
but then again, we're going off of how we would react or how we would come at things. Like I know myself, I wouldn't have been able to sit in a courthouse and hear them talk about what had happened to my daughter. I would be tied down somewhere being fed sedatives. There's no way I could have put myself through that. But it's like with the Madeleine McCann case. It's like with the Lindy Chamberlain case. People are convicted and tried on the basis of how they react to a certain situation that perhaps we don't understand. But I agree there's a lot that
we wouldn't want to convict Mike Halbach on something like that. But it's fair to ask the questions.
Yep, and it's fair
to it's fair to ask the questions. Yeah.
Lindy Chamberlain case, just to enlighten us, that was the dingo ate my dog.
Dingo ate my baby. I hate that. I hate that.
Ate my dog.
But yeah, so Lindy Chamberlain and her husband Michael Chamberlain were convicted of killing their, I think, 10-year-old daughter Azaria at Ayers Rock, based on crappy forensic evidence, on their religion, on the way she reacted in the press. I remember being like a young teenager when that happened in Australia. And it was a witch hunt. And I think you would still find now, if you ask people, they would, even though she's been exonerated, that they would still believe that she did it.
Yeah.
That's the most worrying thing, isn't it? For me, that the fact that apparently there was political pressure at the time to convict because from a tourist point of view, they didn't want anybody to feel that it was dangerous to go there because of the dingoes. But as you say, even having been proven innocent, you've still got people. You've still got the likes of these. Well, let's bring it right forward to the innocence files. You've still got Dr. Michael West protesting the fact that he put genuine rapists and killers behind bars.
Yeah. He's another cast of characters that we've seen before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has anybody seen The Innocent Man? It's based on. Is it it's the only John Grisham? that's not a novel. That's a genuine story. And I thought he was really good in it when he gave his narrative and explained about it. And what exactly was going on there? There's people that have confessed to stuff that they never did.
Yeah, Carl Fontanet and Tommy Ward.
Yeah. And they're still locked up.
Carl Fontanet, I believe he was released, or he's in the process of being released. Tommy Ward, they're still fighting for him. I think Northwestern are involved in that.
Right. Northwestern Pritzker School.
Yes, Centre of Wrongful Convictions.
Yeah. What does the Pritzker part of that name have to do with it?
I would imagine that's probably from a generous donor years ago, perhaps. I don't know. I'm just taking a guess. But there is the governor of Illinois is Pritzker, isn't it? Pritzker?
Right. I believe that they were given a sizable. They were Northwestern University. They were given a sizable donation in order to set up the law school. Is that right? From somebody called Pritzker.
I don't know, but it would make sense.
Yeah. So talking about donations, I'm sure that Sharper Than the Pencil has been keeping everybody going with, where to donate during this MaM-a-Thon. It's not quite the same as last year, is it, Mark? We've got a slightly different system, I believe.
Yeah, so my understanding is the way it's working is that there are any number of organisations that have been, if you like, given the tick of approval. And so any donations that are being made direct to those organisations. And there's a possibility to donate directly to the Boys Canteens account, subject to some protocols of doing that. So that's it. And to know where to donate, you have to go to the relevant links to see that. So, and I noticed,
posted 2 minutes ago.
What's that, Roel?
The link was posted 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, I think it's been up several times. Thanks to Sharper Than the Pencil for putting them all up. But as I would just like to point out, because of obviously I had to hire the Dude Studio. I would just like to point out that it was on the condition that.
Yes. On the condition that what?
that I advertise the fact that we need to we need to keep the dude going in Dr.
All right. Okay. Hey, I've got a little story I want to tell you. It's
go on then. Go on, Mark.
A human interest story, which I know you'll all appreciate. So sometimes we forget about the human aspects of what's going on here. God, you have to just have me that big on the screen. So, hang on. I need my sign. Here we go. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Last June in 2019, after the rally, I stayed on in Manitowoc and in the area for about another 10 days. And one of the things I did was to go and visit Alan Avery up in Crivets, because Alan goes up there pretty much every weekend from Friday through to Monday, and comes back to the yard on Monday nights. And anyway, I went up to visit Alan. I went up with Sandra Greenman, and I'd been there before, so it wasn't the first time. And I'd had at the rally this jacket. In fact, Paul, I sent you a photo just before we started this session, which I'm not sure whether you saw, but if you find it and you can put it up while I'm chatting here, that'd be nice, of Alan wearing this green and gold Australian sporting jacket, which I gave to Alan as a little gift. It was a bit of fun. He really liked it, and he put it on and wore it with pride. So that's in June of last year, June of 2019. So I'd gone back again in August, and then I was there last November as well. And in November, I didn't get to go up to Crivets for whatever reason, and I dropped in to see Alan at the yard before I was leaving to come home. And Alan said to me, among many things, he says, "Oh, Mark, there's something," in the Wisconsin accent, of course. "Hey, there's something over there for you," right? And and I go, and Alan's hard of hearing, so when he talks, he speaks quite loudly. And I go, "What do you mean, Alan?" He says, "Just over there, And he points to an envelope, not this envelope, but an envelope. and it had some writing on it. I'm just going to make up what it said on it. It said something like, Bob's Spare Parts or something like that. And I go, this thing? And he goes, yes. And I goes, it's not for me, Alan. It's for, Bob's Spare Parts. He goes, no, not the envelope. What's inside the envelope? So I open up the envelope, and this I do actually have. Inside the envelope was this. Whoops. This, a $1 note. And I go, Alan, what's that all about? And he goes, that jacket you gave me in June? Well, I realized you left $1 in the pocket, and I've been saving this to return to you, And I thought, oh my God, I just can't believe this man, right? He's such a good man, right?
Mm-hmm.
$1's nothing. I didn't know it was there. He knew it was there. He knew it wasn't his, and he had hung on to that for nearly 5 months to return it to me, and that's why I've kept it. I've kept it as a symbol of who the man Alan Avery is, and being Stephen's father and Brendan's grandfather. It's just a wonderful, wonderful man. So I thought you might like to know about that.
You've sent me a lot of pictures, some of which are suitable for this channel, some of which aren't. Particularly the one of you as a baby.
What?
We will not go into that one.
But anyway, sometimes it's easy to forget the human side of this thing. Not for long, I should hasten to add. But, Alan's a really nice man and good fun. He's a bit of a cheeky character, but he's a very nice man. And, he's as honest as the day is long. And I have $1 that apparently was mine anyway. So anyway, he's a nice guy.
Okay. I think we're coming towards the sort of back end of today's session. So I'd just quickly like to go through ladies first. Thank obviously Tracy for coming and joining us, because you are definitely the go-to lady when it comes to any question I have regarding Brendan. So that is absolutely brilliant, and thank you for joining me. And if you are able to pop in at all tomorrow evening, we look forward to Fleetside's presentation, amongst other things. We do have a rather hairy monster that's going to join us right now, all the way from Belgium.
Hi, Jerome.
Hello, Jerome.
Hello, everybody.
Roel, thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow when we do it all again. And
it's my pleasure, Paul.
The dude's whiskey bottle is getting seriously low now, so dude, make sure you stock up for tomorrow, okay?
You can't buy that. You can't buy that on the green screen, that's for sure.
And Mark, if you're able to join us again, it's going to be later tomorrow. Starting, well, we're now coming up towards 12:30, but that's going to be at 12 o'clock tomorrow, which I believe is going to be what your 9 o'clock on the Sunday evening, yeah.
Yes.
Now, Fleetside, would you like to just quickly tell us what we can look forward to tomorrow? Is it part 7? Have I got that right?
Yeah, so it's part 7, and in the spirit of MaM-a-Thon, hopefully that won't detract from the free and open discussion, depending on who we have available. But the idea is to continue on the path of what has been a series of presentations that are geared more to modeling what went on. So the notion of being able to try to, as truthers, look at how we analyze our analyses, and the distinction between micro-analyses and the small theater of the whodunit to the more macro conspiratorial type thinking, and the merit in each. And we'll go through some terminology, just hopefully to add to the truther community some analytic perspectives that are unencumbered from law necessarily. So certainly we tried to put the legal perspective in there, but to the benefit of anybody out there that cares to add in will be important.
Well, I believe that there are going to be some tables and charts. So, Roel, if
We'll come up with some numbers.
Float your boat, then
I'll try to see if I can make that.
Yes, I'll try and maybe if I reduce it to the code behind it, will that might appeal your.
Yeah, maybe.
Hey, Paul, can I
yes,
say one thing?
please,
I'd
yes,
be remiss before we finish off. Look, one of the things, I'm sure I echo the sentiments of everyone currently on this screen, is that I feel very, very fortunate and enriched by the fact that, notwithstanding the tragedy that is Making a Murderer, at least so far, is that I've come to be associated with just a wonderful group of people, including everyone here, who've really had an impact on me. And I feel a better being because of that. And everyone
Likewise,
here does their own thing. So I'm feel very fortunate in a tragic set of circumstances for that to have happened. So, and so
likewise.
Agree. Likewise. Yeah.
And there's the lady, Mrs. Green. Did you green screen her in too, Paul, or what?
yes.
No, I'm just fake.
Is that Eric Jose's girlfriend, is it?
No, Mark, he wouldn't be so lucky.
I think that's the boss of the Capaldi household.
Yeah, that's right.
I think so.
You might be right there.
Yeah.
On a kitchen.
No.
Well, thanks for having me, Paul.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank you all
for letting me ramble on, as I usually do.
I have to show off my Avery shirt as well. Here we go. Yeah.
There we are. We're back. We're back in my studio.
Oh, there you go.
It's like a child with a new toy.
Oh, I know.
I've been teaching lessons, and I've not just been doing music. I've been doing geography. So here we go. Here's a quick sample. Okay, where in the world am I? Okay.
Really?
Anybody know where this is?
Hang on. Go on, Paul. Quick.
Don't see anything.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
You're in Tracy's country.
Yeah, but you're at the MCG.
Nearly.
You're at the other stadium. I forget.
Etihad Stadium or whatever
Marvel,
it is
they call it now.
Marvel,
I think.
yeah.
Marvel, yeah.
And now? Oh,
Yeah.
it takes a couple of seconds for the screen to change.
Oh, I have no idea where that is.
Yeah. that's a shocker, that one.
I'll pass. So.
Okay, here's a tricky one for you.
Okay.
The Chinese Wall.
The Great Wall of China.
Paul, is this what you do with your spare time?
That's what it's come down
Yes.
to.
This is to keep the students amused. Yes.
Yeah, this is Paul's. As I say, a kid with a new toy, a kid in a shop. This is Paul. I mean, my mother-in-law's been on the phone this morning. She was asking how he was, and I said, "Oh, I have no idea. We live in the same house, but I very rarely see him."
He's off traveling somewhere.
Trying different backgrounds.
Yeah.
I think it's Jerome time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is where? Where are we now?
2 minutes. Yeah.
Hogwarts.
Hogwarts.
In Hogwarts.
Yeah.
And this is Eunice's idea of social distancing.
Last one.
The last couple on the moon.
Yeah. Let's see, Neil.
Okay. Right.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, I don't know.
Thanks all the people in the chat.
Yeah,
We're up to yes. We're gonna obviously hand over to Jerome very shortly. Jerome, you want to just quickly tell us who you've got lined up?
Yeah. First, hi everyone. Hi Roel. Hi Tracy. Hi
Hi,
Fleetside.
Jerome.
Hi Mark.
Hello.
I'm Mr. Husseini. So for today, I have for the first time, I'm honored to be part of this beautiful human being quest.
Mhm.
And today I will receive Mrs. Sharon Sunshine
Mhm.
to talking about some interesting subjects. I will receive a little guy to say "ni" all the time. I don't know if you, you see who
Yep.
I'm talking about. And
Yes.
like Dave and Sandra Begokta are not available this year for MaM-a-Thon because it's very, very, very too late for them. I will share today three of Dave's video about MAM, but also share his own video, his own story with us. Three really interesting video because he found some very good detail on certain points, and after that some several surprise prompts like a few members of the French wrecking crew. So I really enjoyed this MaM-a-Thon for this year.
Good. Well, I can honestly say it's great having all the new hosts
Oh yeah.
involved. They are absolutely phenomenal. You know, they are absolutely. Can you remember, Mark, when we first started off doing live chats with the dude, and we used to try and get people to come on and do, you know, chats with us, or just post something about, you know, their thoughts on you know, making a murder. And you look at the community now, the YouTube community now, and well, not just YouTube, but obviously that's something that I'm sort of involved in. It's just phenomenal how it's just grown and grown.
Yes, I think that's really just symptomatic of people's passion for the cause of justice, really.
Yeah.
This is why it's like it is. And yeah, and we all have that whole ancillary group of people who talk to us in our personal lives about this stuff that we don't necessarily see on the things we're doing, but they're just as interested in what's going on. A day doesn't go by I don't get asked, you know, what's the latest with Brendan and Stephen.
Yeah.
Happens every day. So
anyway, if Sharon is your first guest, Jerome, I had better not keep the Ouija
Yeah.
pointing any longer because I've already taken up some of your minutes. Anyway, listen, Tracy, many thanks for joining us. Hopefully, if
Thanks
you've
for
got
having
the
me.
chance to pop in tomorrow, please do. I'll send the link. Roel, likewise.
My
Mark,
pleasure.
yes, and Fleetside, really looking forward to catching up with you tomorrow. Thank you all for joining me. Jerome, I'll see you very shortly.
Okay.
Bye now.
Cheers, everyone. Good luck, Jerome.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.